very good morning to you. Just after 6 o'clock on Sunday, February the 16th. I'm David Bull. Hope you're very well wherever you are waking up this morning. Now, great news, as you would expect. It's Sunday. That means it's National Almond Day today. That's right. It's a day that celebrates the versatile and nutritious nut, rich in flavour and health benefits. Yum.
Sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. Peter Paul enjoys that nuts. Peter Paul mounts don't.
Right, also today, it's Do a Grouch a Favour Day. This is a day which was obviously initially celebrated in the United States, where else, but we need to adopt it here. So, if you see someone who is a little bit grumpy today, like me, do something nice for them to cheer them up. Turns 61 today, so a very happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you.
Right, let's start today's show, shall we?
Today's fascinating facts.
So, on this day in 1659, the first British cheque for £10 was actually written by Nicholas Vanacker and is now in the archives of the National Westminster Bank. On this day in 1927, wow, the birth of actress June Muriel Brown, MBE. Do you remember who she was? Well, she was best known for her role as the busybody, chain-smoking gossip Dot Cotton in the long-running British soap opera EastEnders. She died on the 3rd of April 2022 at the ripe old age of 95, or as they say, that is a good old innings. Thank you. Oh, also, on this day in 1946, you have to be a certain age to know who I'm about to talk about, the birth of actor Ian Lavender. Do you remember who he was? His best remembered role was as Private Frank Pike. Of course, the youngest member, also called Stupid Boy, of the platoon in the BBC sitcom Dad's Army. He also had a cameo role in the 2016 film adaptation of the series. He actually was born on this day in 1946. And those are this hour's fascinating facts.
It's the talk weekend, let the fun unfold. David and Harrison, stories to be told. Judy live.
Well, a very good morning to you. Just after 6 o'clock on Sunday, February the 16th. Our little jingle gave it away because joining me this morning, I'm delighted to say, Harrison Ormond-Varty, who is a political commentator. Good morning.
Morning. I made the jingle.
You made the jingle?
Yeah.
They're made specially by Dave every single day.
Thanks, Dave.
You know, Dave's a legend.
Does he sing them?
Yeah, he sings
He's
them.
got quite a feminine voice.
No, he doesn't. Are you a fan of almonds? National Almond Day.
Never had one.
You've never had an
No,
almond?
I've managed to swerve them all my life.
Really?
Out of choice. Yeah.
Well, I think almonds are brilliant, actually. According to this, they are popular due to their flavour, impressive nutrient profile. They're also cheap. You can make almond butter, actually. But if you serve almonds, they've got protein and fibre, vitamin E, manganese and magnesium. There's also, and I'm pretty sure about this, they contain selenium. We believe that selenium is important to keep your mental functioning, so your cognitive functioning alive. Perhaps you should start having almonds.
You could be a doctor.
Yeah, I could be. What's your favourite nut, then?
I'm not a big nut fan. If I were to narrow it down, I like the nut in an M&M.
Oh, of course you
But
do.
I wouldn't like it on its own. I'd have to have the M&M with it.
So it's the chocolate with the nut.
With the nut, yeah.
Yes, that's sweet and salty. I like that too.
Yeah.
Peanuts?
No. I'm
Cashew
not,
nuts?
I'm not big on nuts.
Why?
I like olives.
Right. That's your starter for 10. I don't like nuts, but I do like
I had
olives.
those before I came in.
Did you?
Yeah, olives, bit of feta cheese, bit of red Leicester, and prawn cocktail crisps.
How very European of you, as for a breakfast. Right, shall we start this morning? There's a lot in the papers this morning. This is really interesting. We spoke yesterday about the amount of GDP we are spending on defence. I have consistently said we need to increase the amount we are spending. This is the front page of the Sunday Times this morning. This is quite a break for the Prime Minister with his current sort of state of direction. So this is the story this morning. Sir Keir Starmer is preparing to overrule Rachel Reeves and raise British defence spending after this dramatic security summit, which we know happened in Munich, where the US piled pressure on Ukraine to strike a peace deal with Russia. Now, we understand the Prime Minister is due to fly to Washington to see Trump next week, and an announcement on the percentage of GDP that we will spend is expected as early as tomorrow. Now, just to remind you, we are currently spending about 2.3% of GDP on defence. The question is, what should it go up to? The Prime Minister said, this was last night, it was a once-in-a-generation moment for the UK, the US and Europe to work together as he warned against divisions in NATO. He says it's clear Europe must take on a greater role in NATO. Also, at the same time, of course, Zelensky, this was yesterday, and we were on air when Zelensky spoke, calling for a European army. How do you feel about that?
Well, we've been warned about that a few years ago, actually. It was one of the driving forces of Brexit. Do you know, I actually think Trump is right to say this, because proportionally they are spending way more than their European counterparts. Actually, same goes to Canada as well.
Yep.
So he's right to call this out. The UK is one of the better ones. They're not perfect, but they are one of the better ones when it comes to percentages. I think we are going to see an increase in GDP allocations. What that will be, not sure. Maybe I think they always said about 2.5%. So maybe they're going to push it up.
Well, so we're currently at 2.3%.
Nearly there.
Lots of people are saying it needs to be 2.5%.
Yeah.
Other people, very important generals, are saying it needs to be 4%. It needs to be 5%. How does that square with Rachel Reeves, who keeps finding £billions worth of holes everywhere? She said there was a £20 billion hole. Then she's obviously had tax rises of another 20 billion. So you're up to 40 billion. She has no fiscal headroom. I don't know where she's going to get this money from, but ultimately this decision does rest with the Prime Minister.
It does. I mean, I think she's going to be... I mean, she's already had a tough week. It's about to get a bit tougher as she tries to balance those books. I don't know how she's going to get at this one. She's going to have to find the money from elsewhere, because I don't think she can square any more tax increases. The problem with defence spending is people don't see it. You know, people actually don't see the material impact
it's a good point.
of defence. Well, you might see it, but if you are seeing it, it's obviously not a good time. So it's quite hard to sell defence spending, in my opinion, especially in a time where people are feeling the pinch. So it's a tough one for them to spin, and it's a case of, OK, well, if they do this, and if you do hear Keir Starmer contribute to more money, the question is, where will it come from? And if not tax rises, who's getting cut?
Well, if you don't have defence of the realm, you don't have a realm, and therefore spending on education or schools is irrelevant if you have no security.
True.
And the thing is that even for generations like myself, we have never known a time of war that has affected us on these shores. And the same is true for your generation, but if you look back to my father's generation, where they actually had to do national service, I think war was very much at the forefront of their minds.
Well, it's not. Well, you're right. I mean, when you look at the list of priorities of voters, it's immigration, it's the NHS, it's education, it's taxes, it's the economy. I reckon you would say the prospect of war is probably not even mentioned on that list. So that's also a reason why defence spending is a hard one, because they almost think that it's a thing out of kind of a fiction film. It'll never actually happen. It's, you know, so that's that. I think he'll have a hard time pushing, although I do agree we need to spend more on defence. I think he'll have a hard time pushing for it, especially when you've got people in his party who are part of the Corbyn lot, who are very much like scrap Trident and anti-war. So it's an uphill struggle for him, I think, on this.
I would agree. Downing Street signals support for higher defence spending. Starmer yesterday held one-to-one meetings on Friday with Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, the Chief of Defence Staff. He met the heads of the Army, the RAF, the Royal Navy. They say we need to get to 2.65%. Let me just tell you, I looked at this morning. So the MOD is saying 2.65. In 1990, we were spending 3.8% of GDP on defence. Many military sources are saying it needs to be 4%. General Dannett says it needs to be 5%. When you also... There's another story this morning. This is also in the Telegraph. So when the US made this, it was made very clear by J.D. Vance yesterday that the US would have no role in peacekeeping in Ukraine. It would be up to the European forces. Now, Britain's military, according to Lord Dannett, is too run down to lead a mooted peacekeeping mission in Ukraine, the former head of the army has said. He said for Britain it would be embarrassing. It would be quite embarrassing to attempt to lead such a mission because our military is so run down numerically and as far as as capability and equipment is concerned, it would be embarrassing.
Well,
we are no longer a Tier 1 defence force.
I actually don't think it would surprise me, because you've got to think every service paid for and provided by the government is strapped for cash and it is bare bones. So why would defence be excluded from that equation, especially one that doesn't really get that much spotlight? So, yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I think it's sad. I think it's sad because it's much harder to kind of recoup up to that level from where you've gone. If you've dropped down,
we've been complacent, haven't we? So I'm just looking at the army numbers. In 2024, we had 75,000 in the army. 2025, 72,000. Continual reduction in all of this. 2026, 67,000. That is smaller than the US Special Operations Force. I mean, that's just embarrassing.
I think spending's more important than reserves. I remember we spoke about this a while ago, in the sense that wars are smarter in the way we fight them.
True.
They've changed in the sense that it's not... Obviously, at the end of the day, it comes down to who will you have on the battlefield for you, but it's more a case of the technology, it's the cyber, it's the the drones and all that sort of stuff. So I think... Sure, I think that it should be focused on actual spend rather than what particular resources.
OK, so there are also calls, reading other newspapers this morning, to say we need to mothball those two warships that have been built recently, that we need to actually remove those to use that defence spending, to your point, and invest in conventional troops, or indeed in cyber warfare, technological advances instead.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Believe it or not, I'm not a war strategic expert, so I don't know what the best answer is. No, but it's interesting that Labour have obviously come in and now they're surrounded by probably very smart people and that's their remit, who are going, you need to do this. And obviously Keir Starmer, if he does take it on board, hopefully he does, but it kind of just shows actually kind of regardless of what government you have in, the people that are central, the advisors of that government, the amount of influence that they have, regardless of if you're left or right, they always kind of come to the same conclusion.
I was just looking back at my notes here. So since Labour came to power, there have been 500 million of cuts to the armed forces. The Storm Shadows being used against Russia. They scrapped 6 major programmes, including the Army's main fleet of drones. Of course, they scrapped a number of other vessels, HMS Albion, Bulwark, one Type 23 frigate, the Chinook heavy lift helicopters, Puma medium-range lift. There is no plan currently for replacement of any of this. I think that once the Cold War was over, we've become very complacent, too reliant on the United States, and that is what they are basically saying. Pete Hegseth, the US Defence Secretary, said, and this is his quote, "Now is the time to invest, because you cannot make an assumption that America's presence will last forever." That is a threat.
Yeah, I think, it's a wake-up call. I think if anybody watched Trump's kind of press exchange, I guess is the way to put it, where he sits there and he just takes a free-for-all, the main message that was clear was Europe isn't paying their way, and at the end of the day, he has to represent the best interests of American taxpayers. Would be nice if we could have some of that over here. But yeah, I think some countries aren't as good as the UK. I mean, Germany, for example, and their contributions famously aren't as good when it comes to percentages. So I would quite like to see an increase. However, it's a case of, we're not in a position, but then again, what country is in a position to
Well, no country is. And I was just looking at the percentages of GDP. When you look at countries like Israel, 4.5% of GDP. Greece, 3.7%. Poland's very high, actually. Poland's over 5%. Russia, 40%. That shows the divergence between those countries.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see where we are this time next week with it already.
It will. Let's look at the front page of the Mail. The Army Chief, this is the same story as well. The Prime Minister is heading for the dustbin of history. Keir Starmer has been told he has to increase UK defence spending dramatically to counter the threat of Putin, or face the prospect of his premiership being consigned to the dustbin of history. This is the head of the Army, Lord Dannett. He basically has waded into this. And this then comes nicely into stories which are running on various websites, but also the front page of The Observer. So yesterday, Zelensky called for the creation of a European army. I'm not sure it's his place to call for that, and of course there are political sensibilities involved in that. But Starmer set to join Europe Crisis Summit on Trump-Ukraine plan. So essentially this is a meeting of European leaders. They are set to gather next week for an emergency summit on the war in Ukraine in response to concerns that the US is moving ahead with Russia on peace talks. There is no doubt that the US is about to do a deal with Russia without Europe being involved at all.
Well, in fairness, the US holds pretty much all of the cards because the US could turn around to Ukraine tomorrow and say, I'm suspending all your payments. And at that point, a week later, Ukraine will have to surrender. So the US, rightfully so, I think, is instrumental because they have propped them up. Ukraine should obviously be involved in those talks. They should be sat at the table. Whether or not Ursula von der Leyen and Boris Johnson should be there maybe is somewhat irrelevant, really, I think, because... And I think the response to Trump on this has been so shocking by some people. Some people, left-wing commentators, seem almost disappointed in the fact that this war is coming to an end. And I think... So what is the outcome?
At what cost, though?
Yes, I mean, and that's a fair question. But I would then turn it around and say, but what is the outcome you'd like from this then?
But you see here, so you've got divergence between Zelensky saying we need to revert to pre-2014 sort of structures, geographical structures, so before the annexation of those areas. But that is never going to happen, according to the US. What was interesting this morning is that actually Trump's opening salvo is now saying that Russia will have to cede territory as a result of this. So maybe Trump is playing a much cleverer game than people are giving him credit for.
I wouldn't... Trump has gone through his life doing deals, which is why he's been so successful. I think I'm optimistic, I'll be honest, because at the very least, if you strip it all back, at the very least, it's someone who will be in there with authority, who will smack his hand on the table and try to resolve this. I think there will be concessions on both sides, and I think even if it means concessions from Ukraine, it will at least help them to know that Russia has also made some concessions to balance it out. So it'll be interesting to see how they go on, but I think it's very odd to see some people who just want this to rattle on for as long as it is and for more bodies to pile up.
So let me ask you, should Ukraine be allowed to join NATO?
It depends on the deal. It depends on what... If they've conceded things, perhaps maybe that is... Personally, I think that discussion is what has caused all this. It's the discussion of Ukraine
certainly the encroachment of Western forces.
Yes, which has provoked Putin. I'm not justifying it, but it's certainly provoked the decisions taken by Putin. I don't know is the answer to that because it's so sensitive. It depends on the package of deals. It would have to be maybe concessions by Russia for them to do that. I'm not sure.
We spoke about Boris Johnson yesterday and his aspirations to rejoin the Conservative Party at a high level, or maybe to actually become a leader again of the Conservative Party. Right. He's actually waded in this morning as well about Ukraine joining NATO. He says the United States under Donald Trump is committed to a sovereign Ukraine. A sovereign country cannot be constrained in choosing which organisations it wishes to join. Ukraine is entirely sensible to want to join NATO. That process, this is the peach of the comment. That process is a matter for Ukraine and NATO. It is absolutely nothing to do with Putin or Russia. I would add in brackets, and America. Yeah,
I think Boris thinks he's a little bit more influential and popular than he actually thinks he is. I thought his role in the whole Ukraine thing was... I'm on two sides of it because I think, on one hand, I think, wow, look, that's us on the world stage. That's, you know, Boris was actually very good at that. It made it look like we're a real world leader. But on the other hand, it thinks he was there all the time. It almost looked like he had a vested interest in it with how he would... I don't know. It just, something about it just seemed a bit off, going off instinct. But to be honest, I actually do think Boris's thoughts on this is somewhat irrelevant a little bit.
Or did he have foresight? Was he actually ahead of the game? Because, of course, the EU was caught napping over the whole situation, and he was there first. I've said before, I'm listening to his book at the moment. He talks about being on a train going through a war zone to get to Ukraine. Let me just ask you, as a young person...
Go on.
If you were called up, would you fight for the country?
It's a difficult question. It depends.
Why is it?
It depends on the circumstance. If I was asked to go and fight in Ukraine, probably not. But if it was a case of...
I don't think you get given the choice. You're told you are going to be called up. If it's a case of
I was fighting for Britain and it was a case of maybe like Dunkirk kind of situation, you know, then yes, maybe. But I'm not surprised.
Yes, maybe.
Maybe. But the reason why I'm in two thoughts about it is because your most likely group of people who are going to go and fight for this country are probably, by and large, your right-wing patriots, really. And yet we have a left-wing government which hates them. And we've been brought up... I've gone through an education system taught by teachers who don't really like this country, you know, who talk it down, and through an education system that's almost warped in the sense that you shouldn't like it, and you know, I would, you know, if I probably would, yes, but I don't think that many people would. I'll be honest with you. I don't think a lot of my friends would.
Let me rephrase that then. Is the UK worth fighting for?
Yes, it is, because
that was a yes with a caveat.
No, it is, because the UK is bigger than its government, right? You got to try and remove everything that happens from the actual country itself and its history and what it's done for the world. So yes is the answer, but it doesn't make it easy.
No, so to get this clear, if the field of war is tangible, i.e. on our doorsteps, if we have an invasion of this country, you would fight, but for a faraway destination, you are less inclined. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah. What about you?
I would fight.
Yeah, even on a faraway destination?
I'm also too old.
If you were my age?
Yeah, I would have done. Absolutely.
Would have done, but would you now? If you were my age?
It's an interesting point you make about political leadership. I would have, yes, is the answer. I would have to be convinced that the political leadership...
Would you fight in Ukraine?
Would I fight in Ukraine if I believed that the UK security was in threat? Let me ask you this morning, thank you for the moment, is the UK... So the question I want to ask you this morning, is the UK worth fighting for? And if it is, why is it worth fighting for? And where would you fight? Would there be no holds barred to that? Would you fight for the United Kingdom if you were called up? The number 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can also WhatsApp us. You can message us on X as well, at talkTV. Let me leave you before the break with this. Barry, good morning to you. Good morning, David. As a veteran, I would always like an increase in defence spending, but the money needs to be spent wisely. I also believe the priority should be the immediate defence of the British Isles, to your point. If a major player attacks us, it will be from sea and it will be from air. Lots of questions I have this morning. Is it appeasement? If we give in to Putin, is he playing us? Is it just regrouping? Is he then going to attack
do have a natural
other
advantage.
areas?
I mean, we do have a natural advantage of
With a
being
sea
an island.
border.
Yeah. So that kind of tells you where you should invest. I mean, like he just pointed out. It's either going to come from above or from
But the speed of missiles and, of course, the geographical distance these missiles can travel.
You should have a seat at that table, shouldn't you?
Absolutely. Let me know your thoughts. Is the UK worth fighting for? And if so, why? The number 0344 499 1000. This is Weekend Breakfast. Good morning.
All of a sudden, when they said to America, please help, this war's going on a long time and we're scared of Putin, and Trump's like, OK, right, I'm getting in there. don't do that. Don't talk to him. Don't offer him anything. Please give us money. Please give us weapons. And I just think, well, look, I'm not saying that, you know, whatever conversations Putin had with Trump, that I agree with all of it. We don't know what's been said. There could be some tactics at play here. All I'm saying is, you know, Europe should have woken up a long time ago.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk Weekend Breakfast, 6:28. I'm joined by Harrison Allman-Varty, political commentator. I'm asking this morning...
Allman-Varty.
Allman, very good. National Almond Day, Allman Day. So I'm asking this morning, is the UK worth fighting for? Would you put your life on the line and fight for this country? I would, but we've had an interesting conversation about what does that look like. If it was a really tangible war, if we believe that the UK was under direct threat, then I think many people would. But if it is a faraway war, does that change your feelings and your perception, and would you actually fight for this country? If you would fight for the country, why would you fight? 0344 499 1000. This is interesting. Loads of messages coming in. This is RJ in Strathclyde. Good morning to you. Why would the youth of today sign up to fight if required when they know that the million-plus-a-year immigrants wouldn't do so? Great point. I'm a veteran, and I can tell you that I would not leave my family to defend people who hate me, hate the country and the culture they live in, and represent a danger to those we leave at home. That plays into this idea that the UK is becoming increasingly unrecognisable to many people in this country.
Well, in a lot of ways. I mean, that's just one of them. But in a case that, you know, you go to some areas maybe where you were brought up, and you go and visit them 30 years later, culturally they've shifted so much, you know, in the sense that, you know, you go to some places like Whitechapel and even your tube stations aren't listed in English anymore. So if you were brought up there and then you go to York, and then you go, oh, I'm going to go see that flat where I was born in, you wouldn't recognise it.
Actually, we'll talk about this later. There is a shocking statistic this morning. 1 in 10 patients in the NHS who goes to the NHS for care does not speak English. And that means we have to rely on interpreters. What a waste of money. I want to talk about that later. Also,
someone highlighted that in Question Time, actually, a few months ago. And they said, because she was a nurse, and she was like, the interpreter didn't show up.
Yeah. So you can't do anything.
So yeah, it was completely useless. I mean, the correct term for that, I think, is what, health tourism? That's what they class it as?
Well, not if you live here. That's not health tourism.
True. Well, this is bigger than that, isn't it? I mean, this is people
possibly. But also, I know as a medic, of course, it takes up so much more time because you have to ask a question that gets translated. They then give an answer
and
that
gets
gets translated. Yeah, exactly right.
But is it not a requirement? I mean, surely is it not a requirement to come to this country to know English? Do you think so?
Well, one would have thought so. But if you are born here and you don't assimilate and you don't actually bother to learn English,
perhaps they're
then maybe we shouldn't give you treatment on the NHS.
Or perhaps they're what's the correct term for them? If you bring someone that you are linked to, they're your
extended family, or
extended family. Yeah. I mean, at that point, then maybe they don't have to do those checks.
Well, they have to. Well, we'll see.
I don't know.
Let me know your thoughts on all of that. This is Chantal. Good morning to you. As it stands now, the UK would not be worth fighting for, but I would fight for a democracy wherever it might be threatened. I'm too old to fight, but I would be an SOE agent helping the resistance to aid our troops. This is good. Mick in Ely, good morning. Mick says, David, why don't you ask that question to all the Labour front benches? Would they fight for their country? I think we know the answer. Thank you for that.
Well, they'd say yes, wouldn't they? I mean, obviously they'd say yes.
After a pregnant pause.
But would they actually do it?
This is interesting as well. Tony says, hi, David, I'm an ex-soldier and I wouldn't lift a finger to fight for these globalist ghouls. Never. I think that's really pertinent, actually. It's also understanding who is in charge of this country. And if there is some sort of supranational globalist structure, the answer is no. because we're not in control of our own destiny. We're going off at a tangent. I want to move on and talk about the Sunday Telegraph. This is a really... We've been talking about the Chagos Island deals for weeks and weeks. Now, the big headline this morning in the Sunday Telegraph, architect of the Chagos deal raided over a cash scam. So Keir Starmer's Chagos Islands giveaway was plunged into fresh controversy last night. This is after the former Mauritian Prime Minister... He masterminded the Chagos deal, by the way. He was interrogated in, wait for this, a money laundering scandal. This is Pravind Jugnauth, and members of his family were hauled into the offices of the Mauritian Financial Crimes Commission for questioning. There was a 3-hour search of his home. When they searched his home, they found suitcases stuffed with tens of thousands in cash, more than a dozen currencies amongst them, Rolex and Cartier watches, UK visas.
Sounds like a good guy.
Well, exactly, but so there are real concerns over this Chagos deal, and of course that this is a non-binding judgment. Mauritius has never had sovereignty over the Chagos, and now the Conservatives are saying this is an imploding giveaway. It needs to be stopped. Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, said the fact the architect of the appalling Chagos deal has been interrogated in a money laundering probe puts a huge question mark over the future of the proposals. I would agree. Also, strategically, where is the sense?
No, I mean, if we're taking judgment from this guy, I mean, question mark, I'd quite like to know the Conservatives' involvement in this pre-July.
Well, Cleverly was the one that lined it up.
Yeah, from Braintree.
From Braintree.
Some irony there, isn't there? No, I'd quite like to know his involvement in this, because this is very easy for them to make some political points out of it because of how unpopular and how crazy the scheme is. But from what Lammy and Keir Starmer said, they've almost picked this up from where it was left. Now, don't get me wrong, they've looked like they're going to double the payments, whatever that payment will be. However, this isn't something that has just been born out of thin air. So the Conservatives have to answer for this as well.
I would agree with that. And also, just in terms of the deal, it looks like we have to now pay hundreds of millions of pounds up front to Mauritius, 90 million a year to secure what we already own as an airbase. The total cost estimated, this is my understanding from the government, is 18 billion. Nigel Farage has said, actually, because it's linked to inflation, it's not going to be 18 billion. No. It's going to be 52 billion.
Yeah, I saw that. And I think, it's bonkers. How, on one hand, can the government spin, we have no money, and you're going to have to strip, and farmers, well, if your farm's been in your family for 100 years, tough, because pay your share and do your bit. And on the other hand, do this deal primarily out of guilt. I mean, that's what it is.
OK, let's talk about the government having no money. Let's move on to this. This is another... I am really angry about the VAT addition to private schools.
Oh, yes.
This is a story in the Telegraph this morning. Labour forced my daughter out of private school, which we know is happening across the board. Now, wait for this. The taxpayer has to foot the £8,000 bill for taxis. What? This is because the council has to pay for taxis because Ava Lambert, 13, had to leave her private school because the VAT addition added another £3,270 to the school fees. The parents couldn't afford that, and I completely understand that. And so, therefore, there are no schools available to her within a 20-mile radius. So Lincolnshire County Council now has to spend £8,199 a year on taxis to send her to a school 25 miles away. 22 local authorities are forecast to have no vacancies for pupils next September in at least one year group. Experts now fearing taxpayers could be forced to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on taxis. This is, yet again, ideology, ill thought through, and it's actually... It's politics of envy.
Make it make sense. I mean, seriously, I'm familiar with how that works. I mean, where I'm a councillor, we have a school where we have children as far as Brighton. Obviously, so where I'm in Elmbridge in Surrey, so Brighton's probably over an hour away. Taxi. I mean, it's not cheap. It is a special needs school, in fairness, but it's just madness.
It is madness.
It just makes you think. Has no one sat down with the Education Secretary and maybe shown something like this to them? But
they don't care.
They've gone the other way. I mean, we've spoken about this multiple times. I'd go the other way. I'd go incentivise people to go to private school. I live in an area where there is a high proportion of children that go to private school. So there's only a couple of state schools around, which means now it's completely gone the other way, and they don't have the spaces to take them in because... So I would encourage people to go to private school. I'd encourage people to use private healthcare. And like I said, I'd go one step further to say that actually, if you can afford it and you don't use it, it's actually on you. It's your obligation as a wealthy person to use private services to free up those spaces for those who can't afford it.
But they don't want to do that. And the point,
Who doesn't want to do it?
The Labour government doesn't want to
no.
do that, do they? But the point is that actually they say, oh, we're going to actually recoup £1.5 billion. But what they don't seem to realise is the private sector actually saves the state £4.5 billion.
Yeah.
And you're already paying for the state system.
And also that's just anticipating that it happens. Some schools might go bust, which they have. And I think as well, 1.5 billion, if someone did the maths where they divided that amongst all the schools, and it's like 0.26 of a teacher per school, but you'll gain something like 8 point so-and-so student. So it's like, who's actually figured this out? But it's like you said, it's ideology. They've not actually done this. So they've done it because they're appealing to a socialist voter to go, isn't it disgraceful that those private schools have got their tax break? Tax break, anything that's not being taxed right now is a tax break, apparently, whether that's farmers or private schools. Honestly, I could ramble on it for hours. I mean, look, all interest on the table. I went to a private school. I was very fortunate to go there. But if you know, lots of people who go to the school that I went to weren't rocking up in Rolls Royces.
No,
they went there because they didn't go on holiday, they didn't live in a very nice house, and they sacrificed all their expenses because that's what they wanted. This tax will hit them.
Yep.
The people who it won't hit will be the people they don't like, which will be your people who are multi-millionaires. They won't even notice.
I'd like to know how many Labour politicians actually send their kids to private schools.
Ah, that will be interesting. Well, I know that the Cabinet, I'm pretty sure, and don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that the Cabinet is no private school, so none of them went to private school. And talk about that is the best advert for private schools ever. I mean, it's like, send your kids to private school, they'll end up like these guys.
Very well said. Harrison, thank you very much. Lots of you getting in touch this morning. Good morning, David. The government should drop the crazy Chagos deal and divert the 18 billion to the military. That's a really good point, actually. David, what I heard before, Cameron, when Cameron became Foreign Secretary, he drew a line under the Chagos deal, so it was resurrected by Labour. I believe that to be true, but I also actually think James cleverly resurrected it, actually, and then put that deal back on the table. But do correct me if I'm incorrect in that. Lots of others getting in touch. Hi, Dr. Bull. I'm an RAF veteran. I would never fight for this lot, as would none of my ex-colleagues.
That's coming from a veteran.
It is. That's Steve in Germany. Thank you very much for those. We'll take a break. After the break, I'm going to be talking about the latest poll about Rachel Reeves. Is she doing a good job or not? I'll let you ponder that.
Spoiler alert.
I'll let you ponder that. Also, this other story I want to talk about. Almost 1 in 10 patients referred to the NHS does not speak English. Should they be treated on the NHS being paid for by the taxpayer? You tell me. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk, 6:42, Sunday, February the 16th. I'm joined by Harrison Ormavati this morning. Thank you for all your messages. Loads of you getting in touch here. We've no hope. This is Michael saying we've no hope with the Labour government. They're completely out of touch with people. It's very sad times. James from Wendover in Bucks, who's currently living out of Tenerife. Very sensible. I'm 51 now, but a decade or two ago I would have fought for the UK, and not because of my age, but because of the way that Britain was. But now I wouldn't. The nation has been and continues to be destroyed by the left. Immigration of those who hate our nation. As a side note on immigrants, plenty of them come to be British, but millions do not. Plus, can you imagine if British patriots were in Europe fighting for 4 years and came home after that time? What would the country actually look like when they return? Look what's happened in the last 4 years with the opposition of what's been, no opposition of what's been happening here in the UK. With no patriots left in the UK, we would have surrendered the UK by not being here to protect what little of it is left anyway. Keep all of those messages coming in.
That's very thoughtful, isn't it?
It is very thoughtful.
I mean, I saw a message on Twitter. Steve Robson pointed out, and we fact-checked this, didn't we? That
we did.
Although we spend 2.3% on defence, that includes all military pensions. That's misleading. I agree. I think we need to know the raw figure on defence.
So I think it's a brilliant point. The UK defence budget, rightly, as you say, includes military pensions. 3 decades ago, the armed forces were nearly 3 times the size they are today. The defence budget is paying pensions for around 400,000 veterans.
Wow. So it won't be cheap.
It certainly won't be cheap. Let's talk about Rachel Reeves, shall we?
Oh.
Rachel from Accounts. This saga rumbles on. Her CV, the LinkedIn, her investigation, alleged investigation over expenses. Well, this is in the Express this morning. This is the front page of the Sunday Express. Britain's living in fear for the economy. 15%, that high, think Reeves is doing a good job. 67% are against axing the winter fuel payment. Half of Britons think Rachel Reeves is doing a bad job as Chancellor. 15% say she's doing a good job. Nearly 70% saying she was wrong to strip all but the poorest pensioners of winter fuel.
That 15%, they're the Conservatives saying, keep going, keep going.
Yeah, quite possibly. This is polling that's been done by Ipsos, revealing the depth of public fear about the state of the economy. And I think this is absolutely right. 50% saying she's doing a bad job. And I've never known people so fearful over the economy, worried how they're going to put food on the table, actually cutting back dramatically on everything they're doing. We've talked about this. The cost of heating, the cost of electricity. Ed Miliband blindly going on this net zero crusade. Very dangerous man. Meanwhile, Rachel Reeves is going to have to find more money for defence or whatever she's going to splash it on. She has no fiscal headroom. There is going to be a spring statement. I have no idea where she's going to get this money from, but it's not going to be very nice. It's going to be pretty ugly.
Well, I didn't think there was going to be a spring statement because I don't know if you remember when she did her budget, she announced that it would just be once a year.
She did.
So, which makes...
Well, I think she said all the heavy lifting is being done now.
Okay.
Something like that.
Okay, right, maybe. Well, that's what she might have thought. The problem is, you have to bank on a lot of this. Is obviously quite risky because you have to bank on growth. And when the economy doesn't grow and it doesn't meet your forecasts, then you have to find money elsewhere. And obviously, we've had our forecasts downgraded. And I don't know, I mean, how pathetic was it that you saw Labour, they wheeled them out saying, but she got growth, they revised it.
0.1%.
Is that what we're striving for
But also
now?
growth per head went down.
Yes. And no one talks about per capita.
No.
Which is the most important measure, really, of how wealthy you are.
Because we're getting poorer.
I mean, of course, your economy will grow.
But you see, this all links back to immigration, because if you have unfettered immigration and you have people coming to this country who don't contribute, who don't actually work, who are not economically active, then your GDP per head will go down.
Yes.
Because the public services have to then pay for those people.
Bigger. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I heard Nigel Farage say about the last, 2 million people, you can fact check me, you'll know the answer to this, but the last 2 million people that have come to this country, roughly 16% came here on working visas or something. I mean, that's crazy. Now, if in fairness, the Conservatives will benefit the doubt, if they said, we took those 2 million, but in fairness, 85% of those people that come across have filled gaps. They've filled the labour shortages. We actually needed them, otherwise we wouldn't be here. I think, all right, fair enough. 16%, which basically means, I'm guessing, they're all dependents. That must be the bulk of them.
Absolutely.
Which is crazy. I mean, I don't know who'd want to go to university with their mum anyway.
Well, it's a good point. Let's also talk about this, and this is a Labour MP who says the rolling back of winter fuel payments had been extremely damaging for the government, had generated a huge amount of anger. This is the most interesting and pertinent phrase. I think she's in the danger zone. The minute the Prime Minister says he has full confidence in you, you're out.
Yeah, Ooh, she's on shaky ground right now. The only thing that can
How long has
save
she
her-
got?
Oh, it all depends. It all depends, I think, on the next set of growth figures, right?
Right.
I think that's all she's got left. Because the only thing that can save her now is her performance. Because it's certainly not her brand or her name.
No.
So if she's able to pull something out of the bag, and I hate to be a pessimist, I don't think she can, because there's been no indication that there'll be some big turbocharged growth figures. If let's say we're forecast for 0.2% growth and we hit 0.4, then I think she'll probably be all right. But until we get those next figures through, I mean, what was the last one we got? Was it 0?
The
latest one was 0.
The latest growth was 0.1%. I can look up the others,
Right.
but essentially we were so near a recession, weren't we?
Yeah.
Which is
I mean, it
obviously
might
a
even
technical
be a-
recession is 2/4 of negative
Yes.
growth.
I mean, it might even be a rounding error. It might even be a case that they've
Exactly
had to
right.
round up. It was that minimal. We just don't know. But it's certainly not noticeable. And if anything, it's probably a negative notice. People need to realise that GDP will increase if more people come to the country.
Exactly.
That's just how GDP works. It's the exchange of goods and services. But you're right. The main measure of someone's wealth is GDP per capita, and no one talks about that. No one talks about it. The only people that I see that talk about it is reform.
So when the IEA has also commented this morning saying the budget has unequivocally harmed businesses and the economy, but there is still time to fix things by cutting tax and red tape. But cutting tax is not in the DNA of Rachel Reeves.
No. I mean, wasn't it funny a few months ago when they were gunning for growth and they thought, OK, well, who can we consult? Oh, we'll go to the regulators. I mean, really.
How can you save some money? And also, I just wonder, in terms of Rachel Reeves and her future, when Keir Starmer would strike, and maybe there is a sweet spot for him to strike, maybe it is then. Just in terms of just answering your question, in Q1 we were up 0.7%, Q2 up 0.4%, Q3 no growth, Q4 0.1%. So in terms of our total growth, we grew by 0.7%. That's slower than US, France or Canada.
Nice.
So
Hot stuff.
Hot stuff.
I personally don't think he'll sack her, in my opinion. I just don't think he would. I think they're so closely aligned. I think he's bigged her up so much. What did the BBC call her? The Rolls-Royce of politics?
I think when his position is threatened, he will sack her.
Yeah, I think she's safe. Honestly, I think she'll she's at least got the next 6 months.
What do you think? Let me know, please, this morning. Also, I'm asking this morning, is the UK worth fighting for? And if it is, why is it worth fighting for? 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can message us on X as well. I'll leave you with this one. Michael says Rachel Reeves has destroyed the economy. She has no plan. Everyone fears the budget. People are losing their jobs. Unemployment will rise. There's nothing positive to look forward to. Your thoughts as well, please, after the break. After the break, we're also going to be talking about this big story as well in the Telegraph. Nearly 1 in 10 patients referred to the NHS does not have functional English language skills. What are we doing? This is Weekend Breakfast.
all of a sudden, when they said to America, please help, this war's going on a long time and we're scared of Putin, and Trump's like, okay, right, I'm getting in there. Don't do that. Don't talk to him. Don't offer him anything. Please give us money. Please give us weapons. And I just think, well, look, I'm not saying that, you know, whatever conversations Putin had with Trump, that I agree with all of it. We don't know what's been said. There could be some tactics at play here. All I'm saying is, you know, Europe should have woken up a long time ago.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. We're going to talk about the NHS now. Lots of messages coming in. Barry in North Yorkshire, good morning to you. Wes Streeting, who was supposed to be fixing the NHS. They've blown the huge cash injection he gave them. It's made no difference whatsoever. So 176 billion and another 22 billion, I think, went on top of that. It's about 200 billion, probably a bit more. It's made no difference whatsoever. Why are they allowed to hire diversity jobs at twice the salary of a junior doctor? You couldn't make this up. I'll tell you what also you couldn't make up. Nearly 1 in 10 patients referred to the NHS does not have functional English language skills, according to new data. Of the electronic referral letters sent to patients by NHS England last year, more than 9% had to be translated into a foreign language. The highest language that it was translated into was Urdu, and then it was Bengali, then it was Polish. The translation rates appear to have doubled in the last 5 years. In 2021, it was 3.78%, and now has doubled. The Conservatives calling for the NHS's translation and interpretation services to be shut down, calling them a total waste of resources. Chris Philp, who we mentioned earlier, he said, this is an English-speaking country. It is up to people to come here to learn the language, not expect UK taxpayers to spend their hard-earned money on translations. Listen, I totally agree, and having worked in these hospitals, there is a list of signs in multiple languages telling you where the X-ray department is. If you come to this country, you have a duty and a moral obligation to learn English. And I would also say the same is true if you're an expat living in Spain. You have to learn Spanish.
Especially when it comes to claiming services. And, you know, when you read the stories like this, I mean, these are so frustrating, and they should be frustrating, because it makes you think, first of all, why bother paying my taxes? But when you read stories like this, and the Conservatives talk in them, does it not annoy you?
Yes, because they allowed it to happen.
And it's almost as if, like, they've just appeared on the scene. And this is a big reason to why I left the Conservatives. I mean, when you call it, oh, a total waste of resources, Chris Philp, who, you know, was there before. He's not just appeared.
He was a minister.
You know, they shouldn't do this and we would do this. Well, you didn't. I mean, you didn't. I mean, that is... And this is what's so annoying. And this really is why, in my opinion, they won't win the next general election, regardless of how bad Labour do, because they are complicit in this. And I think the only way the Conservatives could have got out of this is if they really went, we have done so badly and failed to do so badly that the whole new shadow cabinet will be people you've not heard of and had no involvement in the previous. That's the only way they could have maybe done
Newbroom.
But they didn't. It's all the same faces. You've got Priti Patel up there again.
And to be fair, actually, it was Rupert Lowe, the Reform UK MP. He was the one that tried to get these figures, and they were very difficult to get. He said the figures only reflected the number of people who do not speak English to a reasonable level and did not include the many foreign nationals who may be able to communicate in our language. He says if you live in England and you can't speak speak English and you don't work and you refuse to integrate, the question has to be, why are you here? What benefit are you providing to the British people? Contribute and integrate or leave.
Yes, because if we had a system where we just let out the NHS to everybody who needed it, it wouldn't exist.
Well, we see health tourism all the time, don't we? From people coming from all sorts of countries.
But we can't have this mindset with everything, whether it's housing or schooling.
Come here.
We aren't the world's
You can have a house,
charity.
you can have healthcare, you can have whatever you like.
It didn't work. I mean, it just doesn't work. People need to realise that we have done our part in helping people, and I'm sure we will continue to do our part, but there is a limit into the extent at which people... And also, there's a point where people who will be struggling will go, what about me? You know, and you know, charity starts at home. It's a fundamental principle. You see it at local level, and what I'm doing in regards of, you know, local... People need to ask the question as well, whether it's this or whether it's, for example, asylum seekers in hotels. People need to ask themselves, those people aren't being deported, right? They're not going anywhere, and they're certainly not going to stay in those hotels for much longer. So where are they going?
Well,
they're buying homes for them.
But, well, it's really interesting. The government is going to spend more money on lawyers to process the applications for asylum seekers coming to this country. We'll talk more about that as well.
They say they cleared it by just granting them all.
Well, that is also true. Harrison, thank you very much for the moment. We'll take a break. After the break, we'll take you through this morning's front pages. We'll also go through some of the other stories that has made some of the inner pages of the papers. This is Weekend Breakfast. A very good morning to all of you.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, a very good morning to you. Just after 7 o'clock now on Sunday, February the 16th. I'm David Bull, and this is Weekend Breakfast. Welcome along. Great news, as you would hope for on a Sunday. It's National Almond Day today, a day that celebrates the versatile and nutritious nut, rich in flavour and health benefits. Yum! Very droll. That's Mark Armand, of course. Very good. It's Do a Grouch, a favourite day. Now, this is a day which was celebrated in the US to begin with. It, like everything else, has come over here. But we need to adopt it, because if you see someone who is a little bit, well, grumpy, you can do something nice for them and cheer them up.
Turn that frown upside down. Upside down. We've got selection. Upside down. Low prices too. Lionel Play World. Turn that frown upside down.
Yeah, very good, very good. Also, happy birthday to Christopher Eccleston. Of course, he's a British actor. He originates from Salford. He's an award-winning thespian, a dad of two, a Manchester United supporter, and he turns 61 today. Happy birthday.
Happy, happy birthday to you.
Let's move on to this hour's Fascinating Facts.
Today's fascinating facts.
So today's Fascinating Facts on this hour. On this day in 1801, Pitt the Younger resigned as British Prime Minister when George III rejected his plans for the emancipation of Irish Catholics. On this day in 1923, I was obsessed with this as a child. Howard Carter, having discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun 12 months previously, lifted the lid on the sarcophagus to reveal a golden effigy of the young king. And also, this is a terrible piece of news, and we're regretting it ever since. On this day in 1965, a second report from British Railways Board Chairman, remember this name, Dr. Richard Beeching, outlined the transport needs for the following 25 years. The report followed his first controversial review of the state of the railways, which was published in 1963. And of course, he said the system was uneconomic, underused, and recommended that a quarter of the railway system should be shut down, and they decimated the British railway system. And that was on this day in 1965, and those were this hour's Fascinating Facts.
It's the talk weekend, let the fun unfold. David and Harrison, stories to be told. Tune in live, it's a Sunday delight.
Well, a very good morning to you. 5 minutes past 7, as you heard from the jingle. Thanks very much for that. Dave Harrison, Ormond Varty joins me this morning.
Morning.
Also, can I just say, talking of birthdays, a very happy birthday to my nephew, Cameron. Here he is. He's a little mini-me, actually.
Hey.
He is 10 today. Amazing. So a very happy birthday. As you can see, we're very close.
Yeah, Uncle David.
Uncle David. And all the kids, I've got 5 nephews and nieces, they all say, or they all call me Silly Uncle David, because I'm probably a little bit silly.
And probably some other names behind your back as well.
Well, probably. The great thing, are you an uncle at all?
I think
You're not an uncle?
No, I'm not.
Right.
No.
The great thing about being an uncle is that you are like a surrogate parent, but just naughtier. And you're allowed to get away with stuff that the parents simply can't do. So if the kids are upset with their parents, they go. I live very close to them all, so they all come wandering over.
Yeah, I mean, that's nice. I mean, my family's quite small. My mum's sister married my dad's brother. I'll give the viewers a few seconds to kind of work that out on a family tree, but it means that it's such a tight-knit kind of family operation, so yeah. But it's nice you're close with them.
Yeah. 10, amazing. And at 10,
Great age.
I think it's just such a brilliant age. And of course, I get told all the time in no uncertain terms what he's thinking. Well, a very good morning to you. Quite busy papers this morning. Let's have a look at this. This is really interesting. We talked yesterday about the Munich Security Conference, and of course, the onus from the United States saying to the UK, you have got to spend more money as a percentage of GDP on defence. You cannot rely on the United States, and I think that is absolutely right. This is the front page of the Sunday Times this morning. PM to overrule Reeves and boost cash for defence. This is interesting because Sir Keir Starmer preparing to overrule Rachel Reeves and raise defence spending. We're expecting an announcement as early as tomorrow. Also, the Prime Minister is due to fly to Washington to see Trump next week. And of course, this is going to put Starmer against Reeves, and we shall see what happens here. Of course, Rachel Reeves keeps being the doom-monger, saying there's no money. Of course, the 20 billion black hole inherited from the Conservatives, which no one can quite corroborate. Then her 20 billion on top of that in terms of
I think it's fair to say that number's
rises.
pretty made up.
I think most people realise that. Yeah. And, of course, then we're looking at what that peace process looks like. So that is the front page of the Sunday Times this morning. We also talked about this morning. The Mail, the Army Chief, the Prime Minister is heading for the dustbin of history. Sir Keir Starmer has been told he needs to increase UK defence spending dramatically to counter the threat of Putin or face the prospect of his premiership being consigned to the dustbin of history. This comes from the former head of the army, Lord Dannert. It coincided with a call from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky for the creation of a European army to replace US troops if Donald Trump retreats from the continent. This is quite an interesting comment, though. Senior army commanders privately told the Mail on Sunday the government should mothball both Royal Naval carriers, the aircraft carriers, with the money they then saved diverted into extra land forces.
I mean, personally, I'd look elsewhere. I mean, I'm no
Where would you look?
I'm no defence expert. I'd start with Chagos, easy win. I'd also look into foreign climate aid. I mean, what's that all about? Foreign climate aid sounds like a scam, doesn't it? So I'd axe that. That's what, 12 billion, whatever that was. Easy fix there. I'd actually, do you know what? I'd audit the whole foreign aid budget. I'd want to know exactly where it's going.
I think that's a vote winner.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. I think what's happening with what Musk and Trump are doing with their Department of Government Efficiency is a vote winner in itself. I actually think if people stand on a platform, local government-wise, in these upcoming local elections, and promise to be transparent with the finances and audit them, and evidence where money is going and what they'd do if they could cut it extra, that would take over councils. If you did an all-out election, you could take over it in that sense. Because problem is, you request an FOI from a local authority, they'll give you about 4 brackets, other services, this, that, and it's like, but what does that mean?
Yes, what's actually involved in that?
To actually understand where the money is really hard, to actually break it down bit by bit, and there's so many categories. That's a vote winner, because if you can say, let's just say your primary objective, let's say, is you're the only party claiming to cut council tax in a world where everything's going up, and you could say, we've cut it because we've identified this spending and this spending as waste. By axing that, not only will your taxes not go up, we'll be able to cut it. That's a vote winner.
It is definitely a vote winner. Also, let's look at the Observer this morning.
My ideas.
well, hopefully they will. The Observer, Starmer set to join Europe Crisis Summit on Trump-Ukraine plan. So this is quite interesting on the back of that. The European leaders are actually deeply nervous, I would suggest.
Yeah.
That essentially what you've got here is Putin and Trump, possibly Zelensky being involved in some sort of peace plan.
He will be.
But the European Union excluded.
Yes. I mean, he will be. I mean, Trump did kind of row back in his comments a little bit, as much as someone like Trump would. So when you hear him speak, he was like, no, he should be sat at the table, which he should be. He should obviously be sat at the table. He's, 50% of the equation. So, but, people are thinking, oh, no, maybe I'm going to get kicked off the gravy train. I think, I do think Europe have been complacent. They were before Trump. They were when Biden came in. The whole thing with Germany as well, not only were they kind of leeching off defence spending from the US, but they were going against what America told them to do by increasing their reliance on Russia with gas.
And so where do you stand on the European army?
Against.
Why? They would then say, well, no,
they're a trading bloc. They're not. That does not fall under their remit.
But that's not what they want, is it? They want a united Europe. They want a United States of Europe.
It's overreach on a huge scale.
So was Zelensky wrong to say there needs to be a united, an army of Europe?
Yes, absolutely. It will only provoke tensions further as well. I actually think it's very inappropriate to suggest it. The European Union is fundamentally a trading bloc. And that is it. Like, if you strip it back, and unfortunately it's trying to be all things and increase its power and dominance, this whole
Yes, but
global...
you see, you're right in terms of overreach, and certainly when I was in the European Parliament, the tentacles go everywhere.
Yes.
So then you have standards and regulations. The whole point about Northern Ireland is we haven't actually allowed Northern Ireland to be a separate devolved country, of course. It's still sitting within the single market. It's trapped. It's absolutely trapped under EU regulations.
I personally think it's, once again, exercising what its remit's actually meant to be. And I would be, yes, fundamentally against... I think most people would be against the European army. It was one of the driving arguments for Brexit. It was the fact that they were having their flag, their anthem, their army. It was becoming something bigger than what it was actually intended to be. Yeah, and when people voted to join, if they knew what it would have been...
Well, they voted to join a common market.
Yes. Yes.
And there is a big difference between the common market and where it has morphed to.
Yeah. And all we did really as a country was reevaluated.
We did, and the people voted.
Yeah.
It's interesting, just reminding ourselves of what Pete Hegseth said yesterday. Europe cannot continue to rely on the US. They must pay 5% of their GDP towards NATO. And I was talking to you this morning about that in terms of how much we should spend. Also, they refused to commit to US troops being involved in peacekeeping missions. Also, NATO membership for Ukraine wasn't a realistic outcome. And a return to pre-war borders was an illusionary goal. Actually, there does seem to be a lot more work going on underneath the sort of surface, because they're now talking about that Putin will have to cede sovereignty of certain parts of Russia to Ukraine, as far as I understand. So I'm not sure we are totally clear what Trump is up to. You made a great point. He's a salesman. He does deals. So he will go in high and then he will find a middle ground.
There's a deal to be made, and that will involve compromises. I'm not saying it won't be a perfect deal. Not everybody will be happy with it, but that also is the same for Russia, because fundamentally, I do think Trump will be objective in these discussions. Interestingly, in that story, though, they were talking about the minerals within Ukraine.
Yes, very good point.
What was it, $500 billion worth?
50 billion, I think, or 500 billion. 500
billion. Now, if you listen to how Zelensky words his things, when he was over in the UK talking to Parliament, and when he was over, obviously, in America, he always used the word loan. And it makes you think, OK, is Trump spotted something here? Where is there something where they can maybe get a return on what they've been spending their money on?
So it's interesting.
Not all of it.
Well, when you look at the rare earth minerals, and it was 500 billion quid, it's cerium and lanthanum. They are used in TVs and LED screens. This is titanium used for aerospace and defence, and lithium, of course, which is absolutely paramount in EVs and batteries.
Yeah.
And so they are sitting on this huge kind of reserve of these rare earth minerals, and the US wants a slice of it.
Well,
is it a down payment for security? What they're saying basically is you give us all of that and then we will establish some sort of security cordon around Ukraine, but you can't be part of NATO.
Ukraine know that they're indebted to the US and they're indebted to Europe to a lesser extent for what they have done, because without them Ukraine would have fallen years ago. So I'm sure that will be at the back of Zelensky's mind, but it's probably not at the forefront. The forefront really for Trump and Zelensky and indeed Europe is to conclude these negotiations and move from there. I mean, they won't be perfect at first, but you've got to start somewhere.
OK, let's move on and talk about this. This is the front page of the Sunday Telegraph this morning. Architect of the Chagos deal raided over a cash scam. There's been a lot of controversy about this deal that Keir Starmer is determined to get across the line here. We were talking earlier, it was actually lined up by James Cleverly in the Conservative Party. But this giveaway was plunged into fresh controversy. This is last night. The former Mauritian Prime Minister who masterminded the deal was interrogated in a money laundering scandal. This is extraordinary. The police found suitcases stuffed with tens of thousands in cash in more than a dozen currencies. They found Rolex and Cartier watches and UK visas. And the Conservatives are saying this is an imploding Chagos giveaway. Your point is very valid. Well, you lined it up in the first place. I don't understand why this hasn't been pulled. It is clear that this is a strategic base for the UK and the US. It has never belonged to Mauritius. And when you look at the money that's involved in this, we're throwing tons of cash after this deal for no apparent reason.
It's guilt. That's all this is.
Or is it that, or is it Starmer who wants to appeal to his lovely dinner party friends in Islington?
It's the same bracket. It's still there. It's all driven by aren't we do-gooders, you know, and all this sort of stuff. It's... no words. Honestly,
words.
It's rare that I'm lost for words. But on this, it's I actually can't... Normally I will give people the benefit of the doubt. I'll try and find the alternative. I actually can't see, even if we were in a situation where this country's like, we have got so much money, we don't know what to do with it. The NHS is just the best it's ever been. Even in that situation, you couldn't sell it. But we're in a situation where we are strapped for cash and everybody is upset, and rightfully so, because things just don't work. And we're looking elsewhere to give something away and to pay for the privilege
But
of getting
also
rid
at a
of them.
time when the world is becoming increasingly insecure, we're basically giving away a strategic
Well, to China.
There was exactly, and there was a really good article yesterday saying that China will place more troops in that area, and of course all you'll do is embolden China, and China is already a threat to this
Well, they'll
country.
only seize the opportunity.
Of course they will.
Yeah.
And also, this is quite interesting. The former Navy chief has urged Starmer to abandon the Chagos deal. Admiral Lord West of Spithead, who was a former Labour security minister, he was also First Sea Lord, urges him to pull out now. Also, and we mentioned this earlier, the total cost is estimated at 18 billion by the government. So essentially the government pays hundreds of millions of pounds up front, 90 million a year to secure the
Strapped to
airbase, which we
inflation.
already own,
Yeah.
strapped to inflation, which Nigel Farage says is about 52 billion.
It's so bad. The deal is so bad. It almost makes you think or assume that there must be a conflict of interest. And we always hear stories, and I don't want to say this is true or not, but we always hear stories of Chinese influence within government and spies and stuff. And it makes you think, is this part of a wider plan for China? Is this them exercising some sort of power internally within government? Because why else?
What's
Why-
the upside of this deal? There isn't one.
But there isn't one. And that's what makes you think there must be some sort of conflict of interest here. Someone must be gaining a lot. And whether that maybe is China, proxy, I don't know. I have no idea. But it makes you at least ask the question and think something's up.
Do you think it will get ditched now Trump's in?
If it doesn't get ditched, Starmer is finished with Trump. And even to the point where they even might tariff us and they don't even want to do that. I think Trump will unpick it. I hope he does, but I think he will. I think Trump's got so much power and leverage, I should say Trump/the US, that hasn't really been used in this past 4 years, that he has the power to do it.
Hence the sort of scrambled visit by Starmer to Washington.
Well, begging, please see me.
Please see me and don't ditch my deal. Let's look at the front page of the Sunday Express this morning. Britain is living in fear for the economy. You don't say. Half of Britons think Rachel Reeves is doing a bad job as Chancellor. Just 15% saying she's doing a good job, and
Who
nearly
are they?
7 out of 10, well, it's a good point, 7 out of 10 stating she was wrong to strip all but the poorest pensioners out of winter fuel payments. So very bad news for Rachel Reeves. The front page of the Mirror this morning, completely different story. This is Jane Andrews exclusive. Killer ex-royal aide works at an animal shelter. A former royal aide who murdered her tycoon lover is now looking after sick pets. Jane Andrews, who was Fergie's personal dresser in the 1990s, beat Tom Cressman with a cricket bat, stabbed him to death as he slept in bed. Now she works at an animal hospital in the East Midlands, where one local said you'd never guess she'd been a key part of royal life.
Well, that's a loaded headline, isn't it?
Well, it's an very odd front page. The Sun on Sunday, here's another very odd front page. Pete, he is probably cheating. I don't know who these people are, so you'll have to inform me.
Who's Pete?
I'm a Celeb's Maura Higgins dished up a Valentine's Day jibe at her ex, Pete Wicks.
Okay.
They're in Strictly in Love Island, I'm being told.
Yeah. Wicks is it? Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Asked
is that brother of Joe Wicks?
I don't know. Apparently not. Asked where the 37-year-old Strictly hunk was as she left a restaurant. She was caught on video replying, "Dunno, probably cheating." It means nothing to me.
She said that?
Yeah.
Wow, bold.
Bold. And then, Daily Star.
romantic.
I'm always a fan of the Daily Star. Front page of the Daily Star. Foul-mouthed Ouija board is disobliging about karma. TV Alan's evil spirit called my mother an S-word. Comic Alan Carr stopped using a Ouija board to be a chatty man to dead people after a potty-mouthed ghost questioned the chastity of his mother in an obscene outburst at his house. Turn to page 5.
Even the dead don't like Alan Carr.
Well, he says that he was absolutely shocked when the Ouija board told him his mum was not a very nice word. He said he was addicted to contacting the dead, and he used to do the Ouija board with his mum when his dad went out to the football. Then things started happening. Car crashes and the chopping board fell off the wall. I had to stop. The more you go into it, the more you go back to it. And he said his mum accused him of moving the letters. He said, I didn't move the letters. This was the power of the Ouija board. He also told how he received a message predicting the death of a woman whose family owned a hotel he was staying in. He said she later died in a road accident. He warned, we don't dabble in the occult.
Wow. Sounds like he's dabbled a bit too much. Dabble King.
Well, quite. Thank you for the moment. We'll take a break. After the break, I want to talk about a story I saw in the week, and I think it's really pertinent. We're going to talk about the UK high street. Have you seen how appalling our high streets look in terms of signage? All these dreadful fast food restaurants and vape shops and all that kind of stuff. Charity shops, terrible shop signage. Classic British shops like Woolworths, British Home Stores, Mothercare. Do you remember any of those? They've all been replaced by these dreadful nail bars, vape shops, mobile phone stores, plastic hoardings out of the front. And in the article it says something really interesting. Back in the day, the shop front was literally the window on the business. So it was there designed to give curbside appeal so that you would go through the door and purchase goods in that store. I'm going to be asking what happened to the British High Street. This is Weekend Breakfast. Good morning.
All of a sudden, when they said to America, please help, this war's going on a long time and we're scared of Putin, and Trump's like, okay, right, I'm getting in there. Don't do that. Don't talk to him. Don't offer him anything. Please give us money. Please give us weapons. And I just think, well, look, I'm not saying that, you know, whatever conversations Putin had with Trump, that I agree with all of it. We don't know what's been said. There could be some tactics at play here. All I'm saying is, you know, Europe should have woken up a long time ago.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk 726. How do you think Rachel Reeves is getting on? This is based on a poll of people, an Ipsos poll, saying Rachel Reeves, the majority of people don't think Rachel Reeves is doing a very good job. What do you think? Get in touch, 0344 499 1000. Good morning, David, says Zoe in Lancashire. Good morning to you. Reeves will also get extra money from PIP payments, the disability payments. In 6 months, they're looking to move disabled people down in capability levels, hoping to save millions of pounds. Very cruel collateral to attack, again, are most vulnerable in society. This is Matt in Wolverhampton. Good morning. Hi, David. Trump is right to exclude the EU leaders. And Starmer, this is about Ukraine. The EU would spend 18 days debating the seating arrangements, then another 4 days on which milk to be poured into the coffee, let alone which notepaper to use. How droll and how accurate. Good morning, David, says Natasha. Good morning to you. What a lovely pair. Oh. Can you and have Harrison with you every week? No.
Oh, he wishes.
You're far too busy. Good morning. This is Jackie. Good morning. Priti Patel started to look into the foreign aid budget, and she was this is your point. And she was hounded out of office on a European army. I expressed concern about the idea many years ago, and MPs, great and good, all laughed at me and said it will never happen. Oh, really? Brilliant point. And I've heard that from MPs as well. We were also talking about 1 in 10 people using the NHS cannot speak any English, which is absolutely appalling. And I said that you have a right and a duty to speak English if you live in this country. And I went on to say that that applies if you are an expat living in Spain. Well, surprise, surprise. This is Sue. Good morning. We are expats, David, living in Spain. We've worked really hard to learn functional Spanish. We've integrated into the community. If we go to the doctor or any official department, we expect to communicate in Spanish. If you cannot, then you are welcome to bring along a translator at your own expense.
I'm with that. I like that. Great. Who said that?
Sue.
Well done, Sue. I mean, that's smart. I mean, common sense. I think it's a case of, yes, but it's at your own cost.
I would agree. Yeah. I was just reading this one. Morning, David, says Anthony in Hove. Hove, actually. You know, Hove, actually, is when you say, are you from Brighton? And they say, no, I'm actually from Hove, actually. Anyway.
That's funny.
Yeah, I know. Love seeing you with young Harrison. He's leaving now. More on the NHS subject. Your talkTV strapline says nearly 1 in 10 patients referred to the NHS does not know English. What am one thinking reading that? I don't know, Anthony, but the point we're trying to make is that there are a huge number of people using NHS services that can't speak English. One more, Vincent says, just use translation software. You don't need to be a brain surgeon to use it, and it saves money. Interesting point. I want to talk about Britain's shop fronts, if I may now. This is an article I read in The Spectator a couple of days ago. And they pose a very interesting question. When exactly did our high streets go from parades of pleasingly styled shops with awnings and arcade windows and decoratively tiled doorways to rows of cheaply made, purely designed signs? The rise of the kebab house fried chicken shop in the mid-1990s didn't help. There was a book written in 2009 showing that 90% of London's chicken shop signage was the work of just one company, a sign shop in Leighton. Then you've got the barber shop, the international food stores. But actually, when you dig deep into this, it's also all of those convenience stores. I didn't know this. One Stop. There's a culprit. They're owned by Tesco. McCall's, didn't know this. They're owned by Morrison's. The Post Office, of course, franchised since it split from Royal Mail in 2012. Poundland, Sports Direct, Shoe Zone, The Works, Coral, Ladbrokes, Costcutter. There is no pride, no civic pride in the parade of shops anymore, is there? It's just a garish mishmash.
Yeah, when you've got your own little shop, if it was a florist, they'd look amazing because you know that depending on how nice your shop is how well your business does. And that's why high streets look so nice. Unfortunately, I think we touched on shoplifters then as well. It's a case of, I don't know if you've ever seen these clips online where you have, security at Tesco and they don't do anything. You'll see people just shoplifting, they'll feel there knowing nothing will happen, and all the security will do is maybe film it, and then that's it. There's no consequence to it, and when there's no consequence, then people just feel free to do it. I think you're right. I mean, the high street is so depressing.
It is.
I mean, our major high street, Walton-on-Thames, for those who know it, is depressing. The only thing left
I thought it was quite smart.
It used to be, not anymore. Some are better. We've got, for example, nearby Cobham, which is really nice. Walton is just... It's just your barbers, nail salons, I'm trying to think, restaurants, obviously, and then it's just standard Tesco Express and all that and charity shops. There is no, you couldn't go in there to like a boutique.
But why would a shop set up in High Street when you're spending all of this money now? And of course you've got heating and employers' national insurance and all the rest of it.
Why would
it makes no financial sense.
I agree.
So what the government has to do is to incentivise businesses to relocate into the high streets. That then allows the sandwich shops to prosper. Also, also here, the number of people who do not come to work on a Monday or a Friday, so they do Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, the demise of local businesses as a result of that. And thankfully, we saw JP Morgan yesterday saying, and I'll talk about this later, saying, I've had enough of this, the boss of JP Morgan, you are coming back to the office 5 days a week.
Yeah, I think, you know, you're absolutely right. Why would people set up an online, set up a business, and why wouldn't they just do it online? You've got to think, you're comparing all those expenses to, let's say, £20 a month for an online website. Sure, it's a bit harder to make an impression online, but the money that you would have spent on your expenses, you could just spend on your marketing costs instead. So I do feel for it, and I think there are so many barriers. Not only is it disincentivised, there's actual barriers using the high street. Things like paying to go to the car park.
So interesting you mentioned, Sean in Gloucester says, good morning, David. The death of the high street for me started when the powers that be started their war in the car. Removing free parking spaces, began charging for it. Do you know, in my local town of Framlingham, you have to pay to park for half an hour or whatever. It's insane. I mean, it's tiny amounts of money. It's not worth doing. And of course, what it does is puts people off from going. I went to the doctor's surgery the other day. 20p to park for half an hour. What is the point of that?
Yeah. And the problem is with a lot of these, whether it's speed cameras or whether, you know, average speed check or parking fines, they get built into a council's balance sheet. So they're very hard to remove. So for example, something like money raised through car parks, they spend it. So it's very hard to then say, oh, let's get rid of that to incentivise high street. They go, yeah, but we can't because it's built into what we're spending. So once they're in, it's very hard to remove, which further strengthens the argument for a Department of Government Efficiency over in the UK to kind of cut all that waste.
And also just clearing up, and talking about waste of money, Canterbury Council was forced to earmark £200,000 towards lawyers and enforcement officers to combat the blight of garish shop fronts. In my local area, in mid-Suffolk, they forked out £400,000, nearly £500,000 to sort out Stowe Market. Well, they need to. But also, I've mentioned this town before, Ipswich. It's a shadow of its former self. It used to be a very proud shopping destination, and now it's full of all those dreadful shops you talk of.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, not only are there, you know, not incentives, there's actual barriers to go there, and I think parking is one of them. And, you know, even at the very least, there should be 30 minutes free to at least have that stimulant to go in and get a coffee and maybe go and check out that shop. But there isn't anything like that, unfortunately.
No, there isn't. There's no destination. Lots of you getting in touch about this. Good morning, David, says Nick Moore. Good morning, one of our regulars. We really shouldn't be surprised by the demise of the high street. Independent shops have no chance of survival when online sellers operate without any of the punitive overheads forced upon those selling from bricks and mortar. Absolutely well said. Good morning, Doc, says Tim in Portsmouth. Good morning to you. The high street's decline started when all the jumble sale charity shops moved in. If there's nothing to go to the high street for, then why would you go?
I mean, the only time I really go to the high street is at Christmas time. And interestingly, the busiest day when I went in, it was Christmas Eve. And the high street was rammed because at that point, online was void. Yeah, because you couldn't order anything online anymore because it wouldn't be in time for Christmas. So at that point, if you want to see what it's like when you can't get stuff online, Christmas Eve is a prime example of, well, high streets are the only option left.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I do like to go, but you're right. You have to make high streets an actual place that people want to go. You do have to meet consumers halfway. And at the end of the day, consumers are just going to go for the most convenient option.
Absolutely.
So what are the strengths of the high street? It's a social thing. You know what I mean? So
well,
play
also,
off its
and it's really interesting. In my local area, I see older people going out first thing in the morning, so they'll talk and they'll chat. It is deserted by the afternoon, and the only reason I go in is to get food and for food shopping. Thanks for the moment, Harrison. After the break, we're going to be asking, is time running out for Kemi Badenoch to convince the Tories that she is actually the right person to lead the party? The question for you this morning, is she the right leader, or should they have yet another leadership election? This is Weekend Breakfast. Good morning.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk 7:38, a weekend breakfast. I'm joined by Harrison Ormond-Varty, who's fiddling around this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm asking this morning, based on these big headlines, PM to overrule Reeves and boost cash for defence. This is trying to appease the US president, the Mail, Army Chief PM heading for dustbin of history if he doesn't do something and increase our percentage of GDP. Also, this is based on the back of this one, The Observer. This is about Zelensky yesterday saying we need to have a European army. So I'm asking this morning, what percentage of GDP should we be spending? We're on about 2.3%. Many people and commentators are saying it needs to be 4 or 5%. The question is, where does that money come from? And also, on the back of that, is this country worth fighting for? And if it is, why is it worth fighting for? The number 0344 499 1000. Let's turn our attention now to Kemi Badenoch. Now, Kemi Badenoch, according to The Guardian, your former party, is being urged to overhaul her approach to Prime Minister's questions and bring in more experienced advisers to prepare for the weekly political joust. Apparently, big criticisms about the way she is taking on Keir Starmer. People are saying the fledgling leader is raising the wrong topics, picking unconvincing lines of attack against the Prime Minister of PMQs. And of course, this is a huge opportunity for her. I've never known an incumbent government being so unpopular so early on. So therefore, it should
open goal.
It should be an open goal.
Yeah.
Why isn't it? What's going wrong?
I don't want to bad talk the Conservatives too much because I was part of their party only a few months ago, and there are a lot of talented people in there, right? She is rubbish, right?
Why?
Honestly. The last Prime Minister's questions that we had on Wednesday was probably her worst performance yet. And the reason why it was bad was not only did she somehow make Keir Starmer look good, which is that's a task and a half, but she had her question, and her question, I believe, was around why are people from Gaza using the asylum route put in place for Ukrainians? Yeah.
Yep.
Fair question. And Keir Starmer stands up there and says, you're right to highlight this. We will be closing this loophole. Good answer, right?
Yep.
End of story. She comes up and goes, but he won't just answer the question. I'm thinking, what is she on about? So then he stands up and goes, just answer that. She then stands up and goes, why won't you answer the question? I think, oh, this is just painful. Because clearly she's got this.
Yeah.
And she's gone, won't answer question, ask again. And it just shows that she's not very good, right? I know that's quite brutal, and I know people say give her time, but you know, she has been in government, and I think personally she's not up to the scratch and calibre of it. Now then the next question is, okay, well then it's another leadership election.
Not
Yikes.
another one.
And now this is just harms the Conservative Party's credibility if they have any left. And this is the problem with them, in the sense that whether in government or now in opposition, they're constantly swivelling to try and find the best leader. That, in contrast to someone like Reform, is a problem that Nigel Farage doesn't have to worry about. He doesn't have to spend any of his energy worrying and looking behind him, because he is Reform, right? He's got a cracking team around him. He's got some very talented people. But Nigel Farage is the figurehead. And that isn't the case with the Conservatives. They ride off the brand of the Tories.
And is the difference there that Nigel Farage is whether you like him or loathe him, he's an extremely accomplished parliamentarian. He has been in politics for decades and obviously was in the European Parliament, as we know, and now in Westminster. Kemi Badenoch, new, fresh from this. And I think she was quite a surprising choice as the leader.
Yes. I didn't think it would have been her, to be honest. I thought it would have been someone like James Cleverly or even Tom Tugendhat. I think Robert Jenrick would have probably been the most natural fit. It's interesting actually watching Robert's face next to Kemi, tactically placed next to Kemi. A face could say 1,000 words. It's like, should have been me, the way he looks at her. And, perhaps maybe people will look at the point in time, maybe it should have been him.
What's your view on what I'm hearing from people within the Conservative Party, within the team at Westminster, saying that her choice of topics is so off course? So she picks sort of Westminster-centric topics. She doesn't pick things that actually appeal to the vast majority of people in this country. And there are some really open goals here about the state of the economy. The fact is the winter fuel allowance, all of those things, Rachel Reeves' appalling budget and so on. I just don't think she lands any blows.
I think her problem's bigger than that, in the sense that when you look back and how she handled, for example, the grooming rape gangs, technically on paper she did everything right? I can't fault her. She stood up there and she raised the horrific incidents that were happening, if you could even call it that. But what happened after that was actually she came off negative from it, because it came out that the first time she spoke about it was then, right? So then it will go back to the age-old question of, well, why didn't you do anything when you were in government? And the problem is, it then came out that the first time she's ever spoken about it was for political gain. And then it all looks a bit awful because she's only talking about it for political capital.
And of course, her other own goal was when she questioned the membership of Reform UK.
Yes.
And of course, then Nigel Farage turned it to his advantage, had their tracker. Huge advantage, online tracker, and of course, we've seen the response.
I have a feeling their membership's under 100k. And the reason why I think that is, the 131,000 that they had when they issued the ballots, first of all, is artificially inflated anyway, because they gave people time to become Tory members so they could have a say. So that's not really their true figure. Second of all, it's the case of reports of people having ballots when they resigned their membership long ago. I resigned my membership. They withdrew my money still. I still get emails from on my main email. I get emails from the Conservative Councils Association. They sent me a membership card the other day. It's like they won't let you go. So I reckon the membership's under 100k. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me. They'd never tell us.
You can check out, but you can never leave.
So I can guarantee you, with every penny in my bank balance, that she will not be the leader by the time the next general election comes around.
Oh,
100%.
Sure. But how long has she got?
I personally think they won't get rid of her. She's got a year, at least, because the Tories know they can't.
Can she turn it around?
No. And I know that sounds pessimistic, but she will always face the same problem, and that problem is, why didn't you do it? You had unlimited political capital. You had an 80-seat majority, and you know, she can't get around that. And like I said, the only way they could have done it, maybe, is if they installed people who didn't have a say in government. That's the only way they could have done it, and they didn't. And it's all the same old bases. The brand's broken. Not only is it, they're broken. They're finished.
Is it the end of the Conservative Party?
No, I don't think it is. But I don't think they'll recover in time for the next general election. I just think because if you look at trends, people did not forgive Labour. You know, and even in the last general election, they didn't forgive Labour. They just got in by default. They got less votes than Corbyn did. So I don't think, and also we're not in such a tribal way of politics anymore. People don't vote because they voted like that before and all that. We live in a world where politics is very fractured now, and I think that people are more willing to vote differently than they did before. And interestingly, when I was discussing this with a former Tory MP about why we should have a pact because, you know, we'll win, I said it doesn't work like that. It's not a case of adding, let's say, Reform's 25% with our 20%, with the Conservatives 20%, because a lot of Reform's base are from voters who don't normally vote. And if they get the sense that they've joined 100%. In with the Conservatives, it's ruined their credibility. And that
is exactly what people say to me all the time, is if there is any deal between Reform and the Conservatives, I'm off.
And I'll use the same analogy. It's like Blockbuster, Conservatives, going to Netflix days before they go by.
Shall we do a merger?
Actually, yes, let's join up.
It's a great analogy. It's a brilliant analogy. Harrison, thank you very much. After the break, we'll be discussing all the latest royal stories, of course, with Rupert Bell, our royal correspondent. This is Weekend Breakfast. Good morning.
They're all pulling back from DEI. But interestingly enough here, where there are those international firms, accountancy firms like Deloitte. Deloitte has pulled back in America, it's not here. The thing that's frightening about Britain at the moment is we're now an island. Europe is swinging to the right, America is swinging to the right, Australia is about to, Canada is about to, and we're increasingly on a limb and run. For heaven's sake, our foreign relations are in that safe and steady hands of David Lammy.
Now all of a sudden...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk Weekend Breakfast. I'm asking this morning, is the UK worth fighting for? Simple question. If it is worth fighting for, why? 0344 499 1000. Text the word Talk in your message to 87222. You can message us on X as well at talkTV. But now it's time for Whip It to our roundup.
Rupert's Royal Roundup.
Morning, Rupert.
Good morning, David. You look as if you're about to go and join the Prince and Princess of Wales on their Caribbean island for their half-term jolly to Mustique.
How did you guess? Yes, I am. Yes, I am, Rupert. If you're still there, shall we start? Actually, instead of starting there, can we talk about King Charles? Apparently, he's going to be deployed on a charm offensive mission to the United States. I think it's fair to say that we have a rather rocky relationship right now, or the government has a rocky relationship with the United States and with Trump. So cue the King.
Well, cue the King and the Prince of Wales. I think the issue is... Donald Trump is a royalist. As we saw during his presidential election campaign, he was very happy to share pictures of his state visit with the Queen. He is, at heart, a bit of an Anglophile, for whatever he may be saying about members of the Labour Party and his team saying about members of the Labour Party. At heart, he's a bit of an Anglophile, and he's very much a royalist. So I think it actually, with the fact that the King might be able to provide a bit of soft politics. That's part of the role of the royal family when they go on state visits, is to open doors and be that sort of good view of Great Britain, as it were, going on tour. So actually, it's probably quite shrewd of Keir Starmer to say, well, I'll put the King in the firing line because I may be having to he may have a different view of what he thinks of me. But the King, and he, we know Donald Trump loves his ego being stroked, and the King, I'm sure, will be very good to making Donald Trump feel that this is a great moment in his life to be with the King and indeed the Prince of Wales.
And, of course, in the United States. And if this comes to fruition, it will be the first time a British monarch has visited the United States since 2007.
Yes, well, obviously, that would have been the late Queen. So in many ways... it's probably due to happen, but it's probably even more important given the rocky nature of the relationship between the various political parties either side of the Atlantic. So it is important that the King, who's very keen to fulfill his role, even with the fact that he's still recovering from cancer, he wants to be out and about, and he would see this as an important visit to have, whenever that should be.
And what happens, and heaven forbid this doesn't happen, but if the King then needs treatment for his cancer, is there a backup plan?
Well, again, everything's been movable with the royal family. Everything has been doctors-led. So if there is, maybe something does happen, then perhaps the Prince of Wales would step in and take it. But it very much, the royal family, when it comes to the health issues, as I said, will be led by the doctors. So things can always change. But as we're seeing at the moment, it seems I need one of those doctors.
You do.
seem to be on an even keel with regard to the progress of both the King's health and the Princess of Wales's health.
Can I just ask you, there's an article in the Mail this morning saying Donald Trump remains committed to Prince Harry facing a criminal prosecution if he's found to have lied about his drugs use in his visa application. Now, last week, my understanding was that he would not deport the Duke of Sussex, saying that he had punishment enough with his quote-unquote terrible wife.
Is this Donald Trump sticking to the true path and then changing a week later?
Yes.
Doesn't seem to be any change there, does it?
No, not really.
What I would say, the Heritage Foundation in the States are definitely going after Prince Harry because they want to make sure the truth is out. That's what they're saying, is we need to know, how did Prince Harry get into the country after saying in his autobiography that he'd been taking various drugs at some stage in his life.
Yeah, cocaine, marijuana, magic mushrooms.
Yeah. To name, I think those are the three that he referred to in the book. So Donald Trump is saying, yes, we need to find out. I probably won't deport him, but what I might do is give him a whacking great fine or something like that, because that's what would happen if it went to court. I'm not sure we'll see him heading back to Great Britain, whatever the circumstances, but it does show that this is a little bit of an irritant, probably, for Donald Trump, that he's having to deal with it. Meghan's made her views about him, doesn't rate Donald Trump at all. And also, Prince Harry probably is happier at the moment being in at the Invictus Games in Canada, doing this thing on his own at the moment.
Well, I was going to say, let's talk about that, actually. The Duke of Sussex professed his love of having the Duchess at his side, and then she disappeared. She left him.
Yes, and interesting that her Instagram has suddenly become very big. We had a bit of a tit for tat going on. We had the Prince and Princess of Wales putting out their Valentine photograph from their Norfolk holiday last year, and then suddenly up pops an Instagram of Meghan and Harry having an intimate moment over some fish and chips, and then some other things going on. Funnily enough, she's got a TV programme coming out on March the 4th, so you can see what's going on here. This is very much part of, oh, look at me, I lead such a wonderful life. Whether she left early, I don't know from Invictus Games, but looking at the pictures of Prince Harry, he's definitely enjoying himself. And bearing in mind the next Invictus Games are in Birmingham in 2 years' time, and I know members of the team have been out there planning already for the Invictus Games at the Birmingham, which will take place at the NEC. Will Meghan turn up for that one? That'll be interesting, because she's been very keen to be seen at Harry's side at other Invictus Games. But in 2 years' time, when you think the King might be turning up, Prince of Wales might be turning up, because remember, all three of them were at the heart of the initial Invictus Games. Obviously, it becomes Harry's. He was the driving force, but the other two members of the royal family were very much part of it.
So where's your money? Will she turn up? If the King's there and if William's there, will she turn up?
I think never say never, but at the moment,
So it's a no.
I don't think he'll be busting a gut to be here.
Fair enough. Also, let's just talk finally, if we can, about the King. He was seen with Keir Starmer, with Angela Rayner. He was talking about housing developments. Of course, we know that Poundbury is one of his big pet projects, and building beautiful homes. The headline in the Telegraph is Starmer is not dragging the King into politics, insists Number 10, despite there being giggling photos with Angela Rayner.
Well, this is where the King is going to have to negotiate a fine line, because the Labour Party obviously have got problems in the rural community at the moment. So hiding behind one of the champions of the rural community, i.e. the King, might look a cheap shot. But I have to say the King is very proud of what he's doing in these developments, and I'm sure he's only too happy to share it with Angela Rayner in those wonderful pair of shoes, and the Prime Minister, of what's going on down there. But for the King, he has to be careful that he doesn't get drawn into being seen to be a sort of political, used for a political photo opportunity. And that's something that he's going to have to be very wary of, because, the Labour Party at the moment, certainly looking at the headlines, are looking for all positive news they possibly can get. And maybe it seems like doing a runner down to Cornwall, away from farmers' demonstrations and things, is always going to be something that Labour Party got to be worried about. And the King, too, has got to make sure he doesn't get drawn into...
100%, Rupert. 100%. Rupert, those shoes would suit you. Thank you very much for your time this morning. That's Rupert Bell, our royal correspondent. Harrison, I'm afraid our time is up. Can you believe it? Have you had a good time this morning?
Yeah, I have. It's good. I've had to think about that, but yeah, I did have a good time.
Thanks very much. You're not invited back. Harrison Orman-Varty there. Thanks very much. We'll continue the discussion and debate after this break.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, a very good morning to you. Just after 8 o'clock now on Sunday, February the 16th. I'm David Bull, and this is Weekend Breakfast. If you are just joining us, great news. It is National Almond Day today. Hooray! A day that celebrates the versatile and nutritious nut, rich in flavour and health benefits.
Everybody loves the nut. Brains red or right nut. Everybody loves the nut.
Everybody loves a nut. Also, it's Do a Grouch, a favour day. Of course, this day started in the United States, has come over here. So, if you see someone who is a little bit grumpy, do something nice and cheer them up. Christopher Eccleston, British actor from Salford. He's an award-winning thespian, and he's also father of two. He's a Manchester United supporter. He turns 61 today. Happy birthday!
Happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday, happy.
And on that note, I also want to wish my lovely nephew, Cameron, a very happy 10th birthday. He is a very big grown-up boy today. Happy 10th birthday, Cameron. Right, let's move on to this hour's fascinating facts.
Today's fascinating facts.
So for this hour, some new ones. On this day in 1957, it was death of the politician, wait for the name, Leslie Hall Belisha. Ring any bells? Minister of Transport, he introduced the driving test, the highway code and the Belisha beacon, of course, used at zebra crossings. On this day in 1972, many homes and businesses were without electricity for up to 9 hours a day from this day. Weirdly, I remember this and I was really tiddly. Miners into the 6th week of their strike over pay picketed power stations from all other sources of fuel supply in an attempt to step up pressure on the government. And on this day in 1990, wives of Royal Navy seamen protested over a decision to allow wrens, female sailors, to go to sea. And those are this hour's fascinating facts.
Weekend breakfast, let the good times roll. With friends all around, we're feeling whole. In the kitchen, laughter fills the air. David Bull leading, we haven't a care.
Well, a very good morning to you. 5 minutes past 8, Sunday, February the 16th. If you are just waking up, there's lots going on in the newspapers this morning. On the back of J.D. Vance and obviously issuing that sort of threat to the EU and the UK about the level of defence spending, saying, look, you cannot continually rely on the United States. I think he is absolutely right on that. I've long been calling for an increase in percentage of GDP to be spent on defence in this country. If we cannot defend this country, then there is nothing left of this country. The front page of the Sunday Times this morning, PM to overrule Rachel Reeves. Isn't it interesting how they turn on a dime? So they've gone from saying, well, we're going to go to 2.3% or 2.5% at some point, but we're not quite sure because I need to meet my fiscal rules, which I've broken anyway. And now it looks like the Prime Minister is going to overrule Rachel Reeves and boost cash for defence. Of course, he's going grovelling off to Donald Trump, we believe, next week. We think there's going to be an announcement tomorrow about the level and the percentage of GDP that we're going to spend on defence. It's really interesting, actually. So at the moment, it's 2.3%. There is wide expectation they will go to 2.5%. The Ministry of Defence wants 2.65%. I looked back, and in 1990, it was 3.8%. The military, senior military figures, and this is the head of the Army, the Navy, the RAF, they have demanded 4%, and Lord Dannatt says we cannot do anything less than 5%. So it will be interesting to see what the announcement is tomorrow, but that's the front page of the Sunday Times. The Daily Mail, the Sunday Mail, or the Mail on Sunday, says Army Chief, the PM is heading for the dustbin of history. Sir Keir Starmer has been told he needs to increase UK defence spending dramatically to counter the threat of Putin or face the prospect of his premiership being consigned to the dustbin of history. I was talking about this gentleman. This is the former head of the army, Lord Dannatt. It coincided with a call from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky for the creation of an army of Europe to replace the US if Donald Trump retreats from the continent. This is also interesting. Senior army commanders have said that the government should mothball our 2 aircraft carriers and then use that money to divert into extra land forces. But no doubt we need to spend much more in terms of GDP on defence, and that goes across the board for European countries. The Observer, Starmer set to join Europe Crisis Summit on Trump-Ukraine plan. This was Zelensky yesterday calling for the creation of a European army. I thought that was a bit out of order, actually. And the Sunday Telegraph, this is a big story. The Chagos deal, which we know Trump doesn't approve of. I don't understand this deal. This is ceding sovereignty to Mauritius, which, by the way, has never owned the Chagos Islands. This is a strategically important base for the UK and the US. It looks like, according to Nigel Farage, if we're paying money in tune with inflation, it's going to cost us 52 billion. I thought we had no money left. How are we suddenly finding 52 billion quid to give to Mauritius? Anyway, the headline this morning, Sir Keir Starmer's Chagos Islands giveaway plunged into controversy after the former Prime Minister of Mauritius, he was the one that masterminded this deal, by the way, he was interrogated in a money laundering scandal. This is Pravind Jugnauth and his members of his family were hauled in for questioning at the offices of the Mauritian Financial Crimes Commission following a 3-hour search of his home. The police found suitcases stuffed with tens of thousands of pounds worth of cash in more than a dozen currencies. Rolex, Cartier watches, that casts some doubt on the veracity of this deal and whether he or anyone else benefits from this. And I think this is a very pertinent headline as well this morning, Sunday Express. Britain's living in fear for the economy. I've never known anything quite like it. Britain's delivering a damning verdict on Rachel Reeves' record as Chancellor. 15%, only 15%, saying she's doing a good job. 2/3 of people saying it was wrong to strip the pensioners of their winter fuel allowance. Well, joining me now is Kevin Schofield, political editor at the Huffington Post UK. Good morning.
Morning, David.
Can I just ask you about this sort of volte-face from Starmer? This is based on JD Vance yesterday, basically throwing mud at the EU and the UK and rightly saying, look, you have to contribute. You cannot continually rely on the United States. You need to up your game. We are not going to actually put American soldiers on the ground. You're going to have to do that yourself. Also, NATO is out as far as Ukraine is concerned, even though Starmer yesterday said, I reiterate my commitment for Ukraine to join NATO. And now it looks like he's going to announce something tomorrow where he overrules Rachel Reeves and says, right, we are going to spend more on GDP. Is this to appease Trump?
I think partly, undoubtedly. I think you mentioned earlier that Keir Starmer is looking to go and visit Donald Trump. So I think he clearly wants to go over there with some offer for the president. Now, this has been a live debate in British politics for many, many years, really, the amount that we spend on defence in this country. Now, Labour's position has been we'll get to 2.5% by the end of the Parliament, as long as the economic circumstances allow. That's gone right out of the window by the sounds of things. It's clearly been brought into sharp focus now, as you say, by JD Vance, by the attitude of the new incoming American administration. Now, this is going to be greeted with alarm in number 11. Clearly, they don't think that we can afford it. But all of a sudden, it looks like Keir Starmer is going to overrule Rachel Reeves and say, no, you're going to have to find the money from somewhere. Now, where does she find the money from? Does that mean she's going to have to put up taxes, having said that she wasn't going to do that again? Does it mean that she's going to have to borrow some more money? I'm not sure how we can afford to borrow any more. Interest rates for government borrowing have gone up considerably. So I think what we're seeing as well is a very interesting split for the first time between the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, who up until now have been in lockstep, really, in their approach to government and their approach to the economy. But if Keir Starmer's going to put his foot down and say, look, you're going to have to find the money from somewhere, how will Rachel Reeves respond?
Indeed, and of course we digress slightly because in this section I asked who do you believe has had a good week, who's had a bad week, who should have a week off and who's got a good week coming up, or who should we watch over the next week. Let's start with someone who's had a good week in your view.
I think it's been a good week for Vladimir Putin, actually. If you look at where he has been for the last 3 years, ever since the invasion of Ukraine, he's been a pariah, an international pariah. You name it, economic sanctions, excluded from international summits, and now all of a sudden he's been dragged in from the cold by the new American administration. Donald Trump wants to talk peace. I thought it was fascinating that the first phone call that he had about it was with Putin himself, excluding Europe, excluding Volodymyr Zelensky. And basically, he's given Putin exactly what he wanted, a guarantee that Ukraine is not going to join NATO, and also that there's no prospect of Ukraine going back to its pre-2014 borders. Remember, 2014 was when Vladimir Putin annexed Crimea. So really, I'm sure Vladimir Putin can't believe his luck. He's gone, as I say, he's gone from being a pariah to all of a sudden getting everything that he really wanted from this war. So yeah, I think it's been a pretty good week for him.
Do you think it's a little more nuanced than that? Because there is also talk about Ukraine ceding all these rare earth metals to the United States. In response to that, the United States would somehow ensure the security of the borders of Ukraine. That's one aspect. The second aspect to that is there is talk this morning that Russia would have to give up some of its territory.
Yeah, it's unclear where that would be. I mean, we know that there was a counter-offensive by Ukraine. They went into Russia, and they have managed to hold on to some of that territory. I just find it very difficult to believe that Vladimir Putin is going to accept anything which sees him giving up any part of Russia. He wants Russia to get bigger. He wants to basically re-establish the old Soviet Union. So he'll be quite happy to take a big chunk of Ukraine and bank that. I don't see how America are going to persuade him to give up any of Russia's territory. It'd be a very difficult one for him to sell to the Russian people, who have obviously suffered greatly in this war, hundreds of thousands of casualties. Economically, they're in a bad way as well. And if on top of that they were to somehow lose territory, then I think that would be a very difficult sell indeed. So yeah, I'd be very surprised if in the final analysis whether that is what ends up happening.
Is this, in your view, appeasement? Is this going to come back and bite us?
I think potentially, yeah, there's a very big possibility of that. We know that Vladimir Putin, his ambitions, as I just mentioned, doesn't stop at Ukraine. We know that he wants the old USSR effectively to be re-established. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen overnight or even over the next 10 years, but I think the idea that having, as he would see it, gained from the war in the end by being given or being allowed to hold on to the Ukrainian territory that he's already taken, I think the idea that he'll just sort of go away and consider that a job well done and have no further ambitions, I think that would be pretty naive. So yeah, as I say, he's been given everything really that he wanted. This is not a deal that would have been on offer had Donald Trump not been re-elected. So yeah, I think the accusations of appeasement are pretty fair, really.
OK, let's move on and talk about someone, in your view, who has had a bad week.
Well, you talked about her just a moment ago. Rachel Reeves, I think, has had a bad week. Now, there was a tiny, tiny glimmer of good news for her a couple of days ago when we discovered that we didn't go into recession. That's how bad things are. We're not in recession, so therefore it's good news. But it was minuscule 0.1% growth in the final 3 months of 2024. But that's where the good news really ended for the Chancellor. This story that broke over allegedly some questions over her expenses when she was working for HBOS, and once again the story about her CV or her LinkedIn profile not being entirely accurate. So just on the one hand, where it looked like she might just be getting a little bit of good news, on the very same day this story broke about her past, and that completely overshadowed any economic news that was going around that day. So yeah, I think in the final analysis, again, I think that has been a pretty bad week for her. Before we even get to today, and we find out that she's now going to have to find billions more for the nation's national security.
A Labour, I wonder what you're hearing in Westminster. In the Express this morning, it says there's a Labour MP saying that they know that nicking the winter fuel payments from pensioners has been extremely damaging to Rachel Reeves. They go further. They say she is in the danger zone. There are people around her who want to get rid of her, and there are people around Starmer who want rid of Reeves. Are you hearing anything similar?
Well, certainly there is definitely speculation about a reshuffle, and that Rachel Reeves could potentially be at risk. I still think it would be an enormous shock were she to be moved, certainly in the first half of this Parliament. As I mentioned earlier, she and Keir Starmer, up until now anyway, have been in lockstep. Everyone I speak to in the Treasury and in Number 10 tell me that there's absolutely no chance of Rachel Reeves being cast aside by the Prime Minister. However, one thing we do know about Keir Starmer is he can be ruthless when he absolutely needs to be. And if, push came to shove and it was a question of his future or the Chancellor's future, then I'm afraid it would be the Chancellor who would have to go. I don't think we're at that stage yet. I think it's still, I think he wants to give her a chance to show that her economic policies are working and that the economy will at some point start to grow sooner rather than later. But yeah, no one is completely bulletproof in politics, so I wouldn't rule out her having to go at some stage, but I don't think it's imminent right now.
And who should we keep an eye on this week?
Well, I think we should keep an eye on Donald Trump because, you know, you've got to keep an eye on him because you never know what you're going to wake up to. It's one of the great fascinations of my job now is that thanks to the time difference between now and America, we can wake up at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning and the whole world could have changed overnight while we've been asleep. And, you know, now that we're told that Keir Starmer is about to go over to America, you know, what is going to await him over there? What is Donald Trump's message to Keir Starmer going to be, you know? I thought it was quite interesting when Donald Trump announced that Keir Starmer was wanting to meet him. He was basically saying, I'm not particularly in a great rush to meet Keir Starmer. He's the one that wants to come here. So Donald Trump being as he is, it'll be, well, what's in it for me? What is the deal? What's the deal on offer here if you want to keep me on side? So yes, I think it'll be fascinating, particularly if the visit happens over the next 7 days, exactly what Donald Trump's message for Keir Starmer will be. So yeah, I think we do definitely have to keep an eye on the US president.
And finally, if I may, who should have a week off?
Well, I think after the few days that he's just had, I think J.D. Vance could probably do with sitting down and putting his feet up, having come over to Europe and basically laid down the law, told Europe where they're going wrong in terms of freedom of speech, etc., and also Ukraine. Basically, you know, the message being Europe's going to have to step up. I think he's had quite a few days, so I think he's probably entitled to taking a few days off. And I'm sure leaders in European capitals would be quite glad to see J.D. Vance go away and maybe not show his face for more than a week, probably several years, ideally, as far as they're concerned. But yeah, I think, as I say, after the few days he's had, it's probably best that maybe we don't hear from J.D. Vance for the next little while.
And of course, he's not going anywhere, is he? Of course, he's very young and he's had quite a week. Thank you so much. Always good to talk to you, Kevin. That's Kevin Schofield there, political editor at Huffington Post UK. So many messages coming in. David, this isn't difficult. Stop all the bonkers net zero rubbish. Stop the majority of foreign aid. Start funding our armed forces and start enforcing our borders. We were also talking about the high street. I was talking to Harrison about this. Harrison is right, says Carol from Weybridge, about Walton High Street. He missed the numerous nail bars, the barbers, a depressing town centre. The comparison with its neighbouring town of Cobham is true. We bumped into Georgie Frost in Cobham. Wow, thanks, Carol. Of course, Georgie was here with me only yesterday. I'm also asking this morning, given that Starmer is changing his position, he's running off to Washington, it looks like he's going to make this announcement on percentage of GDP to spend on defence. It got me thinking, is this country worth fighting for? And if you are prepared to fight for this country, why? The number 0344 499 1000. Those calls charged at the national rate. You can also message the word, text the word talk in your message to 87222, and also message on X at talkTV. David, is the UK worth fighting for? This is Chris in Newbury. It can't be. Wow. 40,000 fighting-age young men invade our southern border every year, and the military is nowhere to be seen. Our governments give away our gas energy security to Russia. We're spending billions with China on windmills so they can boost their military. I wouldn't send my daughters to fight for a country that puts them in danger every day. This is Lynn in Dorset. Good morning, David. Honestly, this country, it gets worse. Now you've got Starmer sending the King, Prince William, over there to creep up to Trump, the royal family, especially King Charles. He is the king of woke. I really think they should keep out of it. I like lovely Queen. I would never have done that to her. I honestly think this country is finished. It's my grandchildren I feel sorry for. Thank goodness for Talk TV. Thank you for all of those messages. After the break, we're going to turn our attention to the Future Politics panel. Joining me this morning, Nicholas Lissack, graduate and commentator, and joining him, Grace Gwadamosi, who is a political commentator. That's all still to come. This is Weekend Breakfast. Good morning.
I'm hearing from various different people, I don't know whether this is what you're hearing, that the promised sort of Armageddon, if you like, from Donald Trump and also from Benjamin Netanyahu might not occur because it would appear, hopefully, that Hamas has agreed to release some hostages.
Yes, Mike, I think that's right. I think that this Saturday, once again, we'll see 3 hostages released. We're hearing more and more stories about the torture and the horrible conditions which Hamas, the terrorist group, is subjecting the other hostages to, the ones that remain.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk Weekend Breakfast, 8:26, Sunday, February the 16th. So many messages coming in. Interesting. Sharon, I was just reading that. Harry and Meghan are such a beautiful couple. I cannot say the same about Kate and William. Sharon, controversial. Good morning, David, says Claire. Why should the King do Starmer's bidding? I don't think many people in our country would be pleased to see King Charles helping a government who has done so little for the people in this country and called us far right. The last lot that did Starmer's bidding went over to the US to help the Democrats. Look, it's the King's role, I guess. It's a diplomatic role to ensure that the relationship is smoothed over. And, of course, as we've heard, to Keir Starmer running off to Washington and changing his tone on defence policy. Keep all of those messages coming in. I'm asking this morning, is this country worth fighting for? And if it is, why is it worth fighting for? 0344 499 1000. Those calls charged at the national rate. But now it's time for the Future Politics panel.
The Future Politics panel.
Well, joining us this morning, Nicholas Lissack, graduate and commentator, and joining him, Grace Badamosi, political commentator, who's been away for a terribly long time. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me back on, David.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Lovely to see you as well.
Lovely to see you as well, David.
So shall we start talking about Starmer? This is absolutely fascinating. J.D. Vance laying into Europe and also the UK yesterday, saying, right, you cannot continue to rely on the United States. You need to spend more money on defence. We've heard this kind of very wishy-washy line from government. We'll aim to get to 2.5% of GDP if and when the circumstances allow and our fiscal headroom, but we inherited a terrible mess from the Conservative government and so on, and so on, and so on. Now, Starmer looks like he is going to announce a change in policy. He looks like he is going to Washington. How much should we spend of our GDP, do you think, on defence? We're at 2.3%.
No. I think defence is an interesting one. Obviously, I'd like the spending to remain at a decent level on that. I think the real issue with the force is the numbers. So I think the most recent polls show that just under half of people 18 to 25 would actually fight for Britain under any circumstance
would
at
you?
all. I think the reason that Gen Z individuals feel perhaps not as tied to Britain is because they don't feel a sense of ownership over the country. If you look at a country where previously your parents on the same salary were able to buy a 3-bed semi, and on the same salary now you can't afford to rent a room, you can understand why young people feel perhaps a little bit disenfranchised. Obviously, I would like young people to be patriotic, but when we look around at the economy they've been handed, the society they've been handed, it's no wonder why they don't necessarily feel that Britain works for them anymore.
Would you fight for the country?
I mean, obviously, it's an incredibly difficult decision that people make when they sign up to fight. I am proud to call Britain my home. I feel very patriotic, but it goes back to the earlier point that I made, that people have to weigh up whether Britain really sort of serves them anymore.
Would you fight for your country?
Going back to what I said, it's a very difficult decision.
Would you fight for the country?
I mean, it's a difficult decision.
Yes or no?
When I was faced with the decision, I would make the decision, but I'm not faced with the decision.
Are you going to be
now.
a politician?
Potentially, maybe.
Right, Nicholas, your thoughts on all of this? I mean, people are saying, well, we're strapped for cash and it needs to go to the health service and social care, which I totally agree with. But equally, if we don't defend the nation, we have nothing left. So, in terms of GDP spending, should we increase it, and if so, to what sort of level?
Oh, wholeheartedly we should increase it, and also, firstly, yes, I would fight for my country, because in spite... Absolutely, in a heartbeat, because in spite of the fact that Britain isn't exactly in the best position right now, we all need to come together and actually support the idea of the British nation state. I think a couple of years ago, a leaked Pentagon report actually indicated that the Americans now viewed Britain as a third-rate power, and quite frankly, rightfully so. Britain no longer rules the waves. In fact, we barely rule the local swimming club. And I think...
swimming pool, yeah.
Certainly. Yeah. And I think, in part, I think Grace makes an excellent point about recruitment. I think especially after Iraq and Afghanistan, many young people feel, how may I say this, unwilling to go and fight in these far-off corners of the world for obscure pro-democracy messaging. I think if we were to spend money on simply defending the mainland itself, defending our islands, a lot of young people would be infinitely more enthusiastic about joining up with the military. So, yes, I do think we should increase our defence spending, and quite frankly, tenfold, in all honesty.
Is Grace's point valid, though? Is the sense of unfairness that you contribute to this country, but you can't get anywhere, that you are actually saving? I think Grace's point is really valid, which is, back in the day, you could buy a 3-bed semi with a good salary. Now you can't buy anything. And so therefore there's a sense of being very disenfranchised.
Well, yes, of course young people are disenfranchised. I've said that repeatedly online. However, we have to acknowledge the fact that would things get better if an invading force rocked up on our shores? I don't necessarily think so. This is our home and we have to fight for it no matter what. So in spite of any negative economic situation, I will fight for this country.
What would you say to people who are messaging in, and there are lots of people messaging in saying, I wouldn't fight for this country because I don't recognise this country because of the sways of illegal immigrants coming to this country who are getting far too much care and attention from the state over and above people who were born here?
Well, of course that's a significant issue. However, I personally think that in spite of the illegal immigration crisis, that is no excuse to not be patriotic. This country is worth fighting for. As, you know, if our ancestors hadn't fought for this country in 1940, or even earlier than that in the First World War, even in the Napoleonic Wars, we'd be living in an entirely different world right now. Britain has been a beacon of liberty and democracy for centuries, and I'm not going to let that flame be snuffed out simply because of contemporary economic discontent.
I mean, it's great to hear. How would you respond to that, where people are saying, look, I would fight for the country, I don't recognise the country, we know immigration is out of control. I think pretty much every political party knows it's out of control and pointing at each other, blaming each other for it. The Conservative parties are very, very keen to blame everyone but themselves.
I mean, firstly, I would unfortunately dispute the claim that illegal immigrants are sort of prioritised in the eyes of the government. I don't think that's quite true, in my opinion. I would say to the people who do feel a sense of discontent that, you know, things don't get better unless we work to make them better, unless we as a sort of society in Britain come together to build that sense of unity again, that, you know, we aren't going to get anywhere. But I wouldn't point to illegal immigration as one of the reasons that
I'm being slightly maverick. I was just thinking, what happens if you actually have conscription in this country once again? If you have to force people to be called up, what would happen to those people who came here through nefarious means? Do you think that we'd see an exodus of people from this country if you were called up, if fighting young men and women of fighting age were called up?
I mean, firstly, I don't necessarily think that's a good idea. I would want people who were proud to serve their country, fighting for their country, and I wouldn't necessarily want people who sort of only came here for economic reasons fighting for the country either. I mean, that's definitely something that we could consider, you know, as a reason to send people back, but I don't think conscription is necessarily the way to go on that.
OK, so just in terms of immigration, Grace says that she disputes some of the claims that I made. Let me just tell you this story, which is in the Telegraph this morning. The government is set to boost spending on lawyers for immigrants by almost a third, despite growing anger over a string of controversial asylum rulings. There are so many, actually. There's another one this morning in the Telegraph. Under the plans, fees for lawyers will increase at least 10%. Officials saying the move will help clear the 100,000-strong backlog of asylum cases. Is it the right thing thing to do to pay these lawyers more money. I think it has been neglected for too long. But therefore, is there then a problem that you're going to encourage more asylum seekers? Are you going to perpetuate the cycle?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, if you promise these people a considerable legal defence, more of them are going to come, because let's face it, you know, there is a considerable backlog as the asylum system in this country is fundamentally broken. Though I think the more important issue is, and this goes back to your point of young people's lack of patriotism willing to fight for this country, is the fact that I think a lot of young people would much rather see their taxes spent on things that actually will cause tangible change. For example, as I was walking here this morning around the corner, this city is filthy. I saw drug paraphernalia everywhere, abandoned beer bottles, cans, newspaper clippings everywhere. It is disgusting. And I think that if we were to clean this country up and actually spend money on actually improving the country, per se, young people would be more willing to fight.
That takes me back to my youth, keep Britain tidy.
Exactly, 100%. So, no, I don't think we should spend money on increasing the salaries for lawyers who are defending those who don't actually pay tax and who really have no connection to this country. I would much rather see that money spent on actually cleaning the country up.
Isn't this, Grace, actually about making sure that lawyers are better paid? Because those lawyers, and I have friends who do legal aid, they are appallingly paid, and maybe this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, this is going to come as no shock to you, but I do think that this is a step in the right direction. I think, firstly, ultimately, the only way to truly get the asylum seeker backlog down isn't by sort of ridiculous schemes like the barge or the Rwanda scheme, but is to process people's asylum claims quickly.
Yeah.
And to be able to do that is to get legal aid to people.
But there's a brilliant article earlier in the week in the Telegraph saying a parasite is devouring the soul of Britain, the parasite being the European Court of Human Rights. This week alone, an Albanian migrant not deported because his son won't eat foreign chicken nuggets. A Pakistani paedophile father not deported because he should have the right to family life under Article 8 of the ECHR. A woman granted asylum after joining a proscribed terrorist group. She was allowed to stay in the United Kingdom because the judge ruled she had a fear of persecution. A Zimbabwean paedophile allowed to stay in the UK. What are we doing?
I mean, I think all of those are sort of quite headline cases. They're quite fringe cases.
Are they not shocking?
I think they're quite fringe cases. The majority of the time, it is firstly not the ECHR, but it is Britain's law system working effectively, which is protecting.
Is it the
people's
interpretation
human
of the
rights.
ECHR?
I mean,
framework?
I think obviously things like, you know, someone's son doesn't want to eat chicken nuggets is obviously seems outlandish, but at the end of the day, I would like to live in a society that
where you have freedom to choose nuggets.
Where it prides itself on protecting whoever's human rights, and it's not dependent on whether you're
He's an Albanian migrant.
I understand, but...
So if you come here illegally, therefore you have no right to choose your nuggets.
Well, firstly, asylum seekers themselves don't come here illegally, but again, I think the chicken nuggets was part of a wider claim, but even then, I think it's good that we live in a country where, whether or not you're an asylum seeker, we pride ourselves in making sure your human rights are protected. I will never be convinced that that's a bad thing to do. So,
what about the violation of the human rights of the children that the Zimbabwean paedophile assaulted? And I think it is particularly sick how Article 3 of the ECHR was invoked to keep him here simply because he is quote-unquote gay, autistic and deaf, so he probably wouldn't get the best welcome back home in Zimbabwe. Well, I disagree. I think he wouldn't get the best welcome home because he's a paedophile who did horrendous things to children. And so I think it is utterly sick that we are defending these people's rights to be here.
Isn't the problem here that actually the judge's interpretation has changed and morphed so much under this banner of ECHR that I believe that Britain is a civilised country and therefore we don't need to be constrained by the ECHR. It seems to me that it's a vestige of the organisation we used to belong in. Actually what we need, and I will use this term which has been bandied around, is a British Bill of Rights, and actually to have a very strict legal framework about who qualifies and who doesn't qualify.
Oh, well, I completely agree 100%. I support the introduction of British Bill of Rights, but I also think one of the other primary issues facing this country is the preponderance of activist judges who rule on emotion rather than basic legal principle. I mean, for example, the case of the Zimbabwean paedophile, the judge ruled that it violated his human rights, the potential deportation. Well, as I point out, what about the human rights of the children who he violated?
Well, I can see Grace rolling her eyes at me. And let me give you another one. A woman from the Caribbean staying illegally in the UK who says one of the reasons she can't be deported is because her Latvian-born husband doesn't like spicy food.
I mean, actually reading further into the article, you realise is that part of her claim is also due to having sort of a violent ex-husband, I think, in the country. But going back to the point that you made, going back to the previous point that you made.
So she's here illegally.
Yes.
If you come here illegally, you have no rights.
That's why her appeal was rejected at the first stage. So again, we have another example of the British system working effectively. There is very little within the ECHR that is in contradiction with Britain's own laws on human rights. When you look at the countries in Europe who are not signatories to ECHR, that's not company that we want to be, with. Those are countries with deplorable human rights records that we don't want to be seen on par with. I think getting rid of the ECHR is an absolute mistake, and also, in my opinion, quite nonsensical, because there's very little within British law that contradicts it anyway. So.
And on that note, we should go to a break. Grace and Nicholas, thank you for the moment. We're in the middle of Future Politics. We'll continue this after the break.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We're in the middle of our Future Politics panel with two of our staunch regulars, Nicholas Lissack and also Grace Badamosi, join me this morning. It's been a fiery debate so far. You can tell Grace is back. Let's talk about the NHS, shall we? This is absolutely shocking. Grace probably won't agree with me. Nearly 1 in 10 patients referred to the NHS does not have a functional English language skill. Of the electronic referral letters sent to patients by NHS England last year, more than 9% had to be translated into a foreign language. So when you look at those languages, they are Urdu, Bengali, and followed by Polish. Translation rates have more than doubled in the last 5 years. Many people, many politicians getting very upset about this. Chris Philp saying this is an English-speaking country. It's up to people who come here to learn the language and not expect UK taxpayers to spend their hard-earned money on translations. These are figures that Rupert Lowe, the Reform MP, managed to get out. He says if you live in England and you can't speak English, if you don't work, you refuse to integrate, the question has to be, why are you here? What benefit are you providing to the British people? Contribute, integrate, or leave? Grace?
I mean, you've raised an interesting point there about integration. Absolutely, I believe that everyone who comes to the country should learn English.
But they don't.
However, in the meantime, I would like them to receive life, saving care. So if someone doesn't know English...
Oh, okay, hang on a minute. I'm going to stop you there. In East London, where I have a flat, there are generations of people who live in silos who've never bothered to speak English. If you go to the Royal... I'm going to finish. If you go to the Royal London Hospital, which is in Whitechapel, it is predominantly full of people who don't speak English. I know that from my own personal experience. We have swathes of translators, which not only cost money, but they also triple the consultation time, because you ask the question, then the translator asks the question, they give you an answer, the translator gives you the response, you then say, I don't understand, and round we go. That cannot be right.
I'm going to go back to the point that I was making earlier, that of course I would like people to speak English. However, in the meantime, if they can't speak English, I would like people to be given the care that they deserve.
No, speak English or you get no care.
But I mean, that we're talking about speak English or die at that point. Like, people are getting very important care, and if we're sort of in a hospital setting and the choices are between someone who doesn't know how to speak English just sort of walking out of the hospital or having a translator on site.
Why aren't they learning to speak English? Why are they not learning to speak English?
I mean, we can talk about, you know, integration.
I'm asking that question.
We can talk
Why
about
are they not
different
learning to speak English?
I think a lot of people firstly speak English as a second language, which I don't see.
I can assure you they don't speak any English.
I mean, I don't think you've surveyed every attendee of every hospital
from my own experience as a medic.
I think there are many people who perhaps speak English as a second language, and also some medical terms are quite technical, so it's simply just easier to understand in your native language rather than
you are
English.
Talking nonsense. When you say where is the pain, that is not difficult English.
I would like everyone who tries to create a life for themselves in the UK to speak English. However, I'm going to keep going back to the point I made earlier. If people don't speak English, I would still like them to receive the care they deserve.
I don't think anyone disagrees with that, Nicholas.
Well, I personally think it's ridiculous that there are many people in this country who don't speak English, who sort of live in their own enclaves and refuse to integrate with the rest of British society. This is an English-speaking country. If you want healthcare, speak English. That is
what about
fundamental...
Brits who go to Spain and they can't be bothered to speak Spanish?
Well, I mean, I did live in Spain for 6 years. However, I integrated...
How's your Spanish?
It's actually pretty okay.
Okay, well.
I integrated, I learnt the language. I also learnt quite a bit of Catalan as well, because I lived in Barcelona. And so I think the point that many people come to this country and just refuse to speak English...
I've been told, prove it. Prove you can speak Spanish.
Me llamo Nicolás.
Oh, muy bien.
I proved it. I can speak.
Muy bien. I can ask for dos cervezas y una taxi para...
Una cerveza, por favor.
Yeah, that's all I need to know. 2 beers and a taxi to my house.
To be fair, that is what I ask when I go to the hospital in Spain.
Exactly. So where is this going wrong? Have we... I mean, I do worry about this. So if you go into some of these hospitals, you've got multiple languages hanging from the signs. Are we not just encouraging people to stay in their silos, not learn English? I think there's a major cultural problem here.
Of course we are, and I think this speaks to the failure of integration and the failure of multiculturalism. If you come to Britain, you must learn the language, you must integrate with society, and you must actually adopt the cultural practices of this country. I think it is totally and utterly ridiculous, and it really does speak to the failure of mass migration, that there are enclaves in this country where people just don't speak any English. I'm reminded of this absolutely hilarious interview from a couple of years ago with a woman on the street, in which the reporter asked what makes you proud to be British, and the lady responded, sorry, I don't speak any English, which really does speak to the failure of mass migration. You point out it's 1 in 10 patients. Well, as we recently found out, 1 in 10 Londoners are actually illegal migrants, so that certainly corresponds to the 1 in 10 people who don't speak English. And as Grace points out, yes, some people do speak English as a second language. However, if you speak English as a second language, that shouldn't stop you from speaking it whenever you're going to the doctors in England.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I do have to point out the statistic that every 1 in 10 Londoner is an illegal immigrant is provably not been correct. If you look at the statistics, they count the children of illegal immigrants as also being illegal immigrants themselves, which they are not. They count asylum seekers as being illegal immigrants, which they're not. But leaving that point aside, I think that having signs in different languages actually points to integration, no? That
No,
if you,
it doesn't.
I think it does.
What lunatic world are you living in?
It points to it. integrating, because people come to the country speaking one language, and then we have signs that have it in English and have it in a different language, so people understand what's going on.
I know what you're saying is very trendy, but do you really...
it's not trendy at all.
But do you really believe what you're saying?
I absolutely do believe what I'm saying.
Isn't Nicholas right? It's a failure of multiculturalism, because actually there should be common values. We all share British values.
If an immigrant comes to the country not being able to speak any English, they arrive at the airport, let's say all the signs are only in English or whatever, immediately they have no sense of what's going on. Whereas if we've got signs that have it in multiple languages, they have a sense of what's going on.
I think you're cherry picking here.
They are able to understand what's going on.
It inspires them to learn.
Okay, but inspiring them to learn, not knowing at all what's going on, versus inspiring them to learn, being able to grasp somewhat what's going on.
This is in everyday life.
Okay, so we've left the airport. We're now at
We've left the airport.
Okay, we've left the airport. We're now at a hospital. Okay, we've got a sign that says, okay, the hospital is here in English and in a different language. Again, I'm going to keep going back to the point that I was trying to make, that integrating means that people from another culture are able to assimilate themselves into British culture. We're talking about them marrying, which they are doing.
They are not doing. Grace, you and I are going for a little trip down the road into East London. I have to go to a break. Grace and Nicholas, thank you for the moment. This is Future Politics Panel. It's Weekend Breakfast.
They seem to be obsessed, and I use the word deliberately, with human rights law, and that leads to the madness of offering to pay Mauritius £18 billion that we could far better spend on our own defence in order to rent back a group of islands that belong to us in the first place. This utter obsession with human rights warps many of the decisions that they take. So in that sense, I would probably agree with Vice President Vance.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome This is Talk. David Bull. English is widely spoken throughout the world. Unfortunately, it's not spoken here in the UK. That's George. Good morning, David. Just listening to your debate on language. I lived in Spain for 10 years, and if I needed medical care, it was up to me to take someone with me who was fluent in the language, and there was no way the Spanish would pay for an interpreter. By the way, Grace talks complete rubbish. Which one? I've got to read out. I don't know where that one... Oh, Steve, here you are. Those who come here with no English do actually know a few words of English, David. You're being disingenuous. They know words like asylum, benefits, the NHS. Stop rolling your eyes. Let's move on and talk about JP Morgan. Now, JP Morgan is forcing its UK staff to return to the office 5 days a week from March. And employees, and I quite like this, being told if you don't like it, you can find somewhere else to work. This is Jamie Dimon, his chief executive. He's set to be set on workers returning to the office. 14,000 workers in London at JP Morgan not very happy about what is going on. He starts talking about Gen Z. He talks about bureaucracy at the investment bank. There's a leaked recording. He complains about slow decision-making, phone calls going unanswered, younger recruits who are being left behind because of the shift to remote working. He calls these Zoomers. He said, don't give me this S word, this work-from-home Friday nonsense. I've called a lot of people on Fridays. There isn't a goddamn person you can get hold of. I had it with this kind of stuff.
I mean, I firstly think that's just a sign of old people just not getting with the times. I'm sorry. Firstly, I don't believe that there's no one he can get hold of on Fridays. He is the CEO.
No, you can't. Hang on a minute. He says all of you... effing lot are on Zoom. You weren't even doing what you're meant to be doing. You're looking at your mail, sending texts, you're thinking about the other person, not paying attention, you're not reading your stuff. He's got a point.
I don't think
actually,
he does.
the other
I don't
thing,
think he does.
He does have a point because you have no collegiate spirit either. Because if you sit in your pants on Zoom,
if you look at the efficiency of people who work from home, efficiency increases when you have some level of work from home. It does. Like, that's not my opinion. That's the numbers. When you look at it, you have people who are able to work from the comfort of their home. They don't lose time on the commute. They don't spend time faffing around at lunchtime, going out to Pret or Leon or whatever.
They do put the washing on.
But that people are able to multitask from their home and actually achieve more. And you actually find that a lot of people log on for longer when they're at home because they don't have to leave at 5 on the dot to be able to make the rush hour train. I think ultimately, again, this is just a sign of the older generation not realising that times have changed.
Well, maybe I fall into that category. Nicholas.
Well, Grace talks about how times have changed. She's sat here in the studio right now rather than being on Zoom.
She's not allowed to.
Oh, well, you know, I mean, I'm sure
she likes coming in.
But look, I think primarily, you know, if you work for a company as prestigious as JP Morgan, you should be forced to go into the office 5 days a week. And if you care about the efficiency of working from home, then why don't you work on the weekends as well? Though, look, in my view, I think that Jamie Dimon is absolutely right, 100%. Young people in particular, Zoomers, are quite frankly, the most useless generation. I'm willing to admit that. As a Zoomer myself, I am willing to admit that the vast majority of us are completely and utterly helpless.
I think your generation tends to be very entitled, and I've seen this.
Absolutely.
Incorrect.
I've seen this where you go to a job and you audition the employer. What's in it for me?
That's what an interview is.
No, it isn't.
We're interviewing each other. You're seeing if I'm right for the job, and I'm seeing if you're right for me. An interview works both ways.
You for a job.
It's not what you can do for me, it's what I can do for you. That is the purpose of a job interview.
Or maybe you've got it wrong. Maybe you're old-fashioned. Maybe Grace is right.
I think you should walk into an interview room thinking, OK, does this job provide the right work environment for me as well? An interview absolutely goes both ways. I'm not accepting a job where I feel like the employee doesn't value my time, doesn't value, my time outside of work as well, doesn't provide that work-life balance. I'm not accepting that job. So, again, this is going back to just, old people being stuck in a different generation. I'm sorry.
Right, OK, well, how does demanding you turn up at your job, go to the office, how is that not respecting your time?
I'm telling you that
you're working
I'm more efficient working from home. I'm saying I will work better for you if you let me work from home.
Are you lonely?
This is wow, that was a left field question.
I've got to stop. Nicholas, Grace, really good to see you. Glad you're back.
Thank you.
Great to see you, Nicholas, as well. That was today's Future Politics panel.
The Future Politics panel.
I'm still laughing at that. Gracie, you lonely. I didn't mean it quite as that came across. Anyway, so that was great.
You're getting feisty.
I know. Anyway, we have to go to a break. After the break, it's our Sunday surgery. I'm going to be talking to Dr. Neil Gittos. I want to talk about hyperparathyroidism. It's something that someone emailed in about, saying, could we discuss it? So that is what we are going to do after the break. This is Weekend Breakfast. Good morning.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, a very good morning to you. Just after 9 o'clock on Sunday, February the 16th. I'm David Bull, and this is a Weekend Breakfast. A very good morning to you. Great news if you are just waking up. It's National Almond Day. That's right. It's a day that celebrates the versatile and nutritious nut, which is rich in flavour and health benefits. Yum, yum.
I love nuts, you love nuts, we love nuts, nutty, nutty, nuts, nutty, nutty, nuts.
Yeah, I got the picture. Also, it's Do a Grouch, a favour day. Now, this day originated in the United States, where else it's caught on here as well. So if you know someone who is a bit grumpy, the day is designed so that you do something to cheer them up. To Christopher Eccleston, of course, he's a British actor.
To you, happy birthday.
Ping pong in 1659, the first British cheque for £10 was written by Nicholas Vanacker and is now in the archives of the National Westminster Bank. I was obsessed with this, as I said earlier. On this day in 1923, Howard Carter, having discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun 12 months previously, then lifted the lid off the sarcophagus to reveal a golden effigy of the young king. On this day in 1927, it was the birth of an actress, her name June Muriel Brown. on MBE. She, of course, was best known for her role as the busybody chain-smoking gossip Dot Cotton in the longest-running British soap opera EastEnders. She died on the 3rd of April 2022 at the ripe old age of 95. On this day in 1957, the death of the politician Leslie Hoare Belisha. Think about that name. He was Minister of Transport. He introduced the driving test, the highway code, and the Belisha beacon, named after him, used at zebra crossings. And then I also remember this as well very vividly. On this day in 1972, of course, I was only very small. Many homes and businesses were without electricity for up to 9 hours a day from this day forward. Miners into the 6th week of their strike over pay picketed power stations and all other sources of fuel supply in an attempt to step up pressure on the government. That was on this day in 1972, and those are this morning's fascinating facts.
Weekend mornings, we're taking flight. With David Bull, everything feels right. Weekend breakfast, shining like the sun.
Good morning, 5 minutes past 9, Sunday, February the 16th. If you are waking up, there's a lot going on in the papers this morning. Of course, we saw J.D. Vance laying into the EU and the UK, saying, hang on a minute, you can't continually rely on the United Kingdom. You need to increase your percentage of GDP that you're spending on defence. Now, at the moment, we're in this very strange position where we're at 2.3%, and in the passage of time, they've said we're going to get to 2.5%. But now, the headline this morning in the Sunday Times is PM to overrule Reeves and boost cash for defence. Keir Starmer is preparing to overrule Rachel Reeves and announce something, we think, tomorrow about how much we're going to spend on defence. Is it going to be 2.5% or thereabouts? It's interesting when you look at where we used to be in terms of defence spending. It was a lot higher. Also, it goes on to talk about the talks between Putin and Trump, and essentially Keith Kellogg, Trump's special envoy for Ukraine, confirmed that European allies would be excluded from the Ukrainian peace deal talks, stating he was from the school of realism, and that is not going to happen. There's an interesting note here. He also claimed as part of this deal, Russia might have to cede territory in any peace deal, and there was a need to target its oil revenues to force Moscow to reach a compromise. Talking of defence, front page of the Mail, Army Chief, the Prime Minister is heading for the dustbin of history if he doesn't increase defence spending. Then we've also got this big story about the Chagos deal, which rumbles on. Well, it turns out that this deal has been plunged into chaos after the former Prime Minister of Mauritius, who masterminded the deal, has been interrogated over money laundering. They raided his house and they found suitcases stuffed full of tens of thousands of pounds worth of cash in dozen currencies, Rolex and Cartier watches, and UK visas as well. And here's something that all of us know. Sunday Express, front page, Britain's living in fear for the economy. Just 15% of people think Rachel Reeves is doing such a good job. I'm amazed it's that high. Keep all of your messages coming in, please. Also, only 1 in 10 patients who are being treated by the NHS cannot speak English at all. What do you think of that? Also, going back to the defence subject, it got me thinking this morning, is the UK actually worth fighting for? Would you fight for the country? And if you would, why would you? 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk and your message to 87222. You can also message us on X at talkTV. Keep all of those messages coming in. Loads of you actually talking about what happens in Spain with the interpreters. You have to actually bring your own interpreter. You will not be supplied with one. We went to the police station to report a crime. They refused to accept our report without an interpreter paid for by me. Betty says, good morning, Dr. B. The NHS is on its knees because it's treating half the world for free. No ID with national insurance number to prove that you have paid. If you don't get served like the rest of the world. You don't get service in the EU without your ECHR rules with no local language or insurance card. I see what you're saying. So you're saying that you basically need to prove that you are eligible to get free treatment, otherwise we back bill. Talking about the Future Politics panel, Dr. David graces on a different planet for 99% of her views. And should she be? Is she there on the show as a wind-up? No, she seriously believes everything that she said. Keep all of those messages coming in. But now it's time for Sunday Surgery.
Dr. David Bull's Sunday Surgery.
So we were contacted by a Talk viewer who got in touch with us a few weeks ago to raise awareness of a little-known disease called hyperparathyroidism. And we thought that it would be a really good opportunity to talk about this and for those people who are actually affected. So I want to talk about hyperparathyroidism. What are the parathyroid glands? Where are they? What do they do? And why are they important? Joining me now is Dr. Neil Gittos, who is a consultant endocrinologist at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, Birmingham. He's also Honorary Professor of Endocrinology at the University of Birmingham. Good morning to you.
Morning, David.
Really good of you to join us. And this was suggested by a viewer, actually, who has been suffering from hyperparathyroidism, which is quite difficult for many people to say, and lots of people won't know what that is. But she, like many patients, kept appearing to a doctor with these quite difficult symptoms to interpret. She was pushed from pillar to post. She didn't get a proper diagnosis for some time. And then finally, she was given this diagnosis of hyperparathyroidism. Do you want to explain what the parathyroid glands are, where they are, what they do, and what happens when they go wrong?
Sure. No, I'll pick that up. So I see a lot of cases of what's called primary hyperparathyroidism, and it is tricky to say. So the parathyroid glands are important in regulating the blood calcium. I think most people recognize calcium important for bones and teeth and nails, etc. And our bodies keep the calcium very tightly regulated. And there are 4 tiny glands, about the size of a grain of rice, I would say, that sit behind the thyroid gland in the neck. They produce a hormone called parathyroid hormone, or PTH, and that hormone goes around the body and actually regulates the calcium levels. So it takes calcium from the skeleton. It helps with absorption via vitamin D. So keeping those calcium levels important, keeping those calcium levels regulated is really important for our well-being. If one of those 4 tiny parathyroid glands next to the thyroid gland becomes enlarged, you produce too much hormone. Too much hormone fools the body into thinking we need more calcium in the blood than we actually do. And that raised calcium level in the blood can make people feel poorly. It can make them feel non-specifically unwell, which I think is the case that your watcher was making, with tiredness, lethargy, brain fog, aches and pains, which I think we all know can happen day to day, and often it's just passed over as one of those things. But there is a push these days, if you have somebody with persistent symptoms like that, to check a blood calcium, because the truth will be revealed if you have primary hyperparathyroidism with a elevated blood level of calcium, and that hormone that I've been talking about called PTH will also be elevated.
Sorry, you're absolutely right. This lady presented with depression and tiredness and just generally feeling unwell. Her case is quite complicated, and I don't want to go into it at this moment. But essentially what you're saying is that if you go to the GP with these symptoms, really it should be, the high calcium should be picked up on a routine blood test.
Yeah, and calcium is a very, very frequently checked blood test. And in fact, a few years ago, I worked with NICE, the organisation that produces national guidelines, and part of that was to raise awareness, and that people, particularly working in primary care or as a GP, to have a low threshold for checking the calcium. It may be something completely unrelated, but it's an easily accessible, cheap, routine type of test, and it can give you the answer to a cause that can be fully treatable.
Now, you talked there about primary hyperparathyroidism. There is also something called secondary hyperparathyroidism, isn't there? And that is different.
Totally different, and it does get a little bit complicated there. So that means that the level of the hormone is high in secondary hyperparathyroidism, but a common cause of secondary hyperparathyroidism is people with low levels of vitamin D. And in that instance, believe it or not, the calcium tends to be low. So it is a little bit complicated, but the main story is primary hyperparathyroidism is common, vitamin D deficiency is common.
Can I just ask you about her? And I don't know whether you want to comment. She actually, from what I understand from the message I got from her, she presented with a normal calcium, but finally they found that she did have hyperparathyroidism.
Yeah, so it does, again, get into tricky areas, and that, let me introduce another term, which, again, I'm afraid is a difficult one to get your tongue around, is normocalcemic primary hyperparathyroidism.
Trips off the tongue.
So it's something that we, as even experts in the field, struggle with as a diagnosis. We're not quite sure, one, its frequency, and two, what it really means.
Okay, and so just give us an idea. If the GPs are looking for this, how common is hyperparathyroidism?
So probably the most useful statistic to have is women past the age of 50, around the age of menopause, about 1% of women beyond the menopause will have primary hyperparathyroidism. So it's a really common problem. As I say, it is related, more women than men, and as women get older, we see it, as I say, really quite frequently, to the extent that in Birmingham we've set up a specific clinic for dealing with this type of problem.
And in terms of causality, obviously you talk about the parathyroid hormones then producing too much hormone, and therefore the calcium changes. What is the cause, the root cause in the majority of cases you're seeing? What causes that?
The short answer is, in the majority of cases, we don't know. So the what's called an adenoma, these are pretty much always a benign overgrowth of one of the tiny parathyroid glands, and 85% of them, it's a single gland. Beyond that, you can have two glands or more, and that's when it gets quite complicated. And as a lot of medicine is, we understand the causes of the ultra-rare forms of the condition, but we don't understand the sporadic or the common causes of primary hyperparathyroidism.
And so if someone has had this condition for a while and they've had these rather nebulous symptoms and they haven't been, and you haven't picked up a high calcium, what about complications from this disease?
Yeah, good point. And if you if you go to do an internet search, you'll find the kind of historical worst cases of primary hyperparathyroidism, which involve primarily kidney and bone disease. So you might remember me saying early on that the hormone works on the skeleton to take calcium out of it, and if that is unregulated, then you lose calcium from the skeleton, takes the mineral out, reduces the bone density, causes osteoporosis and causes fractures. And that's, if you like, one of the worst manifestations of spine fractures, hip fractures, etc. And the other big one is kidney stones. So too much calcium in the blood, too much calcium in the urine. Too much calcium in the urine makes a likelihood of developing kidney stones. So kidney and bone disease are the big players in severe disease.
And so when people come to see you, have they normally been picked up by a routine blood test, or has it been because they've had a pathological fracture, or maybe they've got some renal disease?
Great question. So the majority of people that see me these days will be, they've perhaps had their cholesterol checked, had their kidney function checked, and oh, hang on, the calcium's high as well. So a coincidental pickup, and they may have very few symptoms that they would volunteer. But you're absolutely right. In parallel, so from our service called Fracture Liaison Service, we pick up patients that have had fractures. We do screen for this condition. We have a significant number coming in sideways from that. And similarly, working closely with the urology or waterworks doctors, we have a number of patients coming in that direction. But the majority come from GPs, and often a coincidental pickup, yes.
OK, so once you've diagnosed it and you now know what you're dealing with, what do you do next? What is the therapeutic pathway from here?
Yeah, so there is a diagnostic pathway which takes a little while to work through. And the question that we come to is somebody with the diagnosis of primary hyperparathyroidism is, should we intervene? Or should we adopt a watchful waiting policy? Now, there's some controversy around this as to what the threshold is. And the reason it's controversial is there isn't a medical effective treatment for primary hyperparathyroidism that deals with it like taking a blood pressure tablet for high blood pressure. It's either watchful waiting and just checking blood tests and kidney function over the years, or an operation on the neck.
Yeah.
So there's quite a big gap there. And as you might imagine, talking to a patient from, hang on, we'll just keep an eye to, you need an operation on your neck. There's quite a conversation in there, and it does need to be nuanced to the person sitting in front of you.
Fascinating stuff. So, thank you so much for explaining all of that. Just to allay any fears, or people who are sitting at home who are depressed or tired or feeling lethargic. I mean, obviously, the first port of call is to go to the GP, have your routine blood tests, and just check everything is okay. What else would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's about persistence of symptoms, and working as a GP. I think there is that kind of terminology around tired all the time and have a screening test. I think if you're just feeling a little bit off colour for a week or two, and there's something obvious in place, but if this is persistent over months, I think to have a really low threshold for checking a simple test of calcium, that's all you need to start off with. If that calcium is abnormal, then the GP would ask for that PTH, that hormone test. Knowing those two results, you've pretty much solidified that diagnosis, and then you should ask an expert, so to speak, if primary hyperparathyroidism looks to be likely.
Perfect. That's why I was asking you. Ask an expert. Thank you ever so much, Neil. Really good to talk to you. That's Dr. Neil Gittos, consultant endocrinologist at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. He's also honorary professor of endocrinology at the University of Birmingham. That was primary hyperparathyroidism. So there you go. You've learned something today. And that was today's Sunday Surgery.
Dr. David Bull's Sunday Surgery.
Loads of messages coming in. I'm asking this morning, would you fight for this country? It's a big question, actually. If you were to fight for the country, why would you fight for the country? What is it you're fighting for? 0344 499 1000. Good morning, Dr. David, says Caroline in sunny Norfolk. Good morning to you. I'm loving the show. My dad was in the Second World War and fought for his country and freedom. I no longer, however, feel free. I feel trapped. I feel penniless. I feel embarrassed to be British. I wouldn't fight for the country, and I wouldn't want my daughter fighting for it either. God, that's really sad, actually. In terms of translators for people who don't speak English, David, I don't understand why we can't use Google Translate instead of employing interpreters in the NHS, readily available on anybody's smartphone. What is the problem? Very good point. David, you got it wrong. EastEnders isn't the longest running British soap. It's Coronation Street. Please get it right. Loads of you getting in contact about our Future Politics panel, saying how much you enjoyed it as well. And also many of you saying the same thing, which is actually make sure that if you don't speak English, you bring your own interpreter too. Just one more. Maggie in London, good morning. It seems to me, David, the country has gone to the dogs since our lovely Queen passed away. We need a Trump here, or a leader who is not afraid of the next morning headlines. It appears that all Conservatives and Labour MPs are frightened of their own shadows. J.D. Vance's speech was brilliant and spot on. Keep all those messages coming in, please. But now it's time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning £25,000.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
So there you go, £25,000. Thanks very much. Your chance, you could be in with the chance of winning £25,000. Keep all of those messages coming in, please. Time for a break. After the break, it's our tech rundown. Joining me will be Davis Fang, our tech presenter. That's all still to come. This is Weekend Breakfast.
that this is kind of the conversations that go on in Downing Street. I don't really want to do that. I can't think of anything else to do. Have you got any ideas? They've already asked for people to give them ideas. You know, it's all a bit of a shambles, isn't it?
Well, that took me right back to when I was a little kid. I was a huge Rainbow fan, I have to say, when I was little. But, well, yeah, it's not been a great start, I think.
It's really not. And it's not a start anymore, either. We're 7 months in, nearly 8 months in. You know, what's going on?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk 9:27. I'm asking this morning, would you fight for this country? Is the country worth fighting for? And if it is, why would you fight for this country? 0344 499 1000. This is Matt. Good morning to you. David, I am 70 years old, and of course I would fight for my country, as it is everyone's duty to step up to the plate. Those that say no should just pack up and go. Those that wouldn't, I would have to look on as sympathisers to whoever the enemy was, and jail time for them, for safety reasons, would ensue. Well, that's fascinating. Pete. Good morning. Would I fight? Yes, I would. Why? It's my country. My family and friends live here, and if they're threatened, then we defend them. I served in the 1980s at the height of the Cold War on the understanding this is why we served. Although now in my 60s, I'd serve again tomorrow. I wish younger people shared that sentiment. Hello, David. My husband just said, why is this question being asked? Would you fight for your country? If you don't want to be or to fight for this country, you shouldn't be here. That's Michelle. Thank you for that. Loads of young people who wouldn't actually fight for this country, it transpires. Lee in Walsall, here's another one. Good morning, David. I would not fight for this country. I would protect my home only. This definitely is not Great Britain anymore. That's Lee in Walsall. Let's take some voice notes now. Let's do the first one of those. My screen is just frozen. Let's do the first one. This is Claire from the Wirral. Good morning.
Morning, David. Loving the show. Why should the King do Starmer's bidding? I don't think many people in our country would be pleased to see King Charles helping a government who have done so little for the people in this country and called us far right. The last lot that did Starmer's bidding went over to the US to help the Democrats.
It's a great point. It's an absolutely brilliant point. Judy, also on the line. Good morning.
Good morning, it's Judy from Altoffs, West Yorkshire. Is anyone surprised that few young people would join the army and fight for this country? They see soldiers being sent to far-off places to fight, and then when they come back, they're dragged through the courts by unscrupulous lawyers, and that's all they've got to look forward to. And the government will throw you up under the bus. As for spending on defence, the defence budget needs to stay the same or reduce, because it's just like the NHS. It wastes money on an industrial scale.
Whoa. I'd like to see the evidence for that. Thank you very much for that. JB also left a voice note.
Sadly, I don't think our country is now worth fighting for. Our government don't want to fight for it. They despise it. They despise us. If we could get that government out and we could get a decent government in, actually was for the people and not for their own pockets and their own ideals, we'd have a chance. But until we get rid of them, we really don't.
Wow. JB, thanks ever so much for that. Keep all of those messages coming in. Would you fight for this country? Is the country worth fighting for? If so, why? 0344 499 1000. But now it's time for Tech Rundown.
Tech Rundown.
Davis fan, good morning.
Good morning,
I need you
David.
to mend my screen.
All right. Have you tried turning it off and turning it on again?
Isn't that called a technical reboot?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're very smart.
I
You're
know,
very good
I know.
at
Well,
this technical stuff.
Well, I normally phone you, or I turn it off and turn it on, and that seems to do the trick, or I change the batteries.
Yeah, the problem with knowing a little bit of tech is that I've automatically become the tech, repair person for all of my friends.
Didn't I call you for something and you couldn't answer
You
it?
did. You just said that your charger was broken. How on earth am I supposed to fix that?
Of course you are. You're meant to know everything. Anyway, shall we start with your first story, which is about AI? I'm always deeply nervous about AI, and we've talked about ChatGPT, for example. I've had various young commentators coming in here saying, oh, I don't know why you bothered to research what you're talking about, because you just put it in and AI comes back with the answer, but it's not always right.
Yeah, and you're not the only person who's sort of concerned, because the BBC are very concerned about artificial intelligence, and they haven't been really happy with ChatGPT and especially Apple Intelligence over the past few months. We've had a case where Apple Intelligence has sort of misinterpreted BBC headlines and created sort of false headlines on people's phones. However,
so essentially it summarises the news stories and pushes them out to people's phones.
Precisely.
And then, of course, young people read it and believe it's true.
Yes, however, Apple has sort of put it in italics now to sort of suggest that it might not be completely true. However, this
It's either true or not true. It can't be not entirely completely true.
Precisely. What the BBC has done this week is that they've made an investigation into the accuracy of AI. So they looked at OpenAI's ChatGPT, they looked at Microsoft's Copilot, Google's Gemini, Perplexity, and a number of others to actually see how accurate...
Which is the most common of those?
I would say ChatGPT is probably the most popular. However, Copilot is on most people's computers. Well, they had a look at... Yes, if you've got a PC, if you've got a PC, you've got Copilot. Right. So they had a look at all of these chatbots and asked it to summarise various BBC articles, and what they found was pretty shocking. So they found that 51% of these generated summaries had significant issues, and 19% of these actually had factual errors. And some of the errors included Gemini saying that the NHS does not recommend vaping to quit smoking. We've also got a lot of cases of AI not really knowing if politicians were in office or not, because a lot of the data that it's calling from is not current and doesn't really make sure to see.
So how does it work? It trawls through the internet and basically gleans that information and puts it into some sort of format that people might understand.
Precisely, and a lot of that information isn't true, and the BBC obviously is concerned about that. The CEO did say that these AI companies are playing with fire as such, and she did call for better collaboration between news sources and AI companies. But I have to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what the AI companies can do to really solve this issue, because this is more of a fundamental issue with AI rather than something that can be quickly fixed.
Do you think it will improve? I mean, we're very much in the infancy of AI. Will it improve the accuracy?
I would say the more powerful the AI models are, and they are increasing in power very quickly, the more accurate they become, especially with Apple's notification summaries that the BBC had an issue with. Because it's running completely on our phones, on our devices, it's not particularly powerful, so it's especially suspect to inaccuracies, let's say.
I thought what she said, Deborah Turness, the CEO of BBC News and Current Affairs, said was very, very useful, actually. We live in troubled times. How long will it be before an AI-distorted headline causes significant real-world harm? I can see that happening. If you get a push notification telling you there's been a missile launch or whatever it is, which is inaccurate, but it could then prove deadly and costly.
Yes, definitely could be an issue. That's why I think that with AI becoming more and more popular with consumers, we sort of have to second guess all of the AI-generated content that we see, and it's a behaviour that we all have to learn.
Did I read somewhere in here that the BBC essentially blocks some of these sites from gleaning their information?
Yes, so basically if you try to get ChatGPT or another one of these AI chatbots to summarise a BBC article, you can't do that because BBC actually blocks access. They actually unblocked it just for this particular test.
That's incredibly clever, though, isn't it? Now, this is a bugbear of mine. We live in what's meant to be a civilised country. We have major spots, particularly where I live, or if I'm actually driving into London, where I can't get a phone signal in this day and age.
Yeah.
And this is quite an interesting article about T-Mobile and what they're actually doing.
Yeah, so we've talked about this a number of times because it is such a big issue since moving here, for me personally.
Is it much worse in the UK than in Australia?
Yeah, in Australia, like, despite the population being really small, despite it being really spread out, I find that the reception is far better there than it is here. And that's supported by data as well. The UK has fallen from 44th to the 51st in how good the mobile connectivity is in this country, and ranks 22nd out of 25 for European countries for 5G coverage. And that is not exactly great for such a densely populated, small country.
And what's the reason for this?
The reason for that is because the BBC put all of its eggs in the Huawei 5G basket.
Not the BBC.
Sorry, not the BBC, the UK rather.
UK, yeah.
And after we realised that, you know, that might not be the best for cybersecurity, and then decided to get rid of all of them by 2027, we've had to dismantle a lot of these towers, and it's not exactly easy or cheap to replace. So that's probably why the network isn't the best. However, T-Mobile in the US does seem to have a possible solution. So they're trialling something called satellite to cell, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Basically, you use satellites to deliver internet to our mobile phones instead of, you know, towers that are on the ground. And they've teamed up with Starlink, with SpaceX's Starlink. So there's the Elon Musk connection over there that everyone loves. And basically, they're trying to use this service to sort of eliminate mobile phone dead zones. So, for example, you know, in the middle of the desert where there's no cellular towers, it might help there. But of course, because it's using satellites, you can't really use it on a cloudy day, as that's affected.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
Using it underground doesn't really work either. So there are issues, but it can help solve some of the connectivity issues that we've got here.
So there's a beta trial going on, free until July, which will be included in T-Mobile's premium Go 5G Next plan at no extra cost. Then they're thinking of adding it at $15 a month. That seems pretty steep.
Yeah, I would say that if you require this service, if you live in a really rural area, then I'd say it's probably a no-brainer. You would get the $15 service. However, for most where you do get decent connectivity, I'd say you can probably pass.
But that seamless transition from cell tower to a satellite, I mean, if it works, that's brilliant.
Yeah, it's really, really good. I mean, we already do have, like, for example, if you've got a recent iPhone, in an emergency, you can call a satellite to send an emergency text.
Because I get the little picture that comes up.
We do love a picture of a satellite. Yeah. So this is sort of taking it to the next level, as there will be mobile data as well.
And do you think if this is successful, it will get rolled out around the rest of the world?
I do feel like that it would. However, I can't remember the specific number, but they're using around 300 different satellites for this trial. And I think that I'm a massive fan of astronomy, and we're seeing this issue that when you look into the night sky, it's no longer the same night sky that, you know, our ancestors saw hundreds or thousands of years ago. It's littered with satellites. So in a few years, when you look up into the sky, it might just be satellites everywhere, and it sort of ruins our view of the sky. But, you know, for good internet connection, I think it's something that we can probably debate.
And also, to see the night sky properly, you need to lie in a field where there are no street lights at all. You can't be in central London. Let's pause just for the moment, Davis. We'll continue this conversation after the break. Good morning.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. We're in the middle of Tech Rundown with Davis Fang. Let's talk. We spoke last week about the iCloud, which for many people they will understand that essentially all your data goes up into somewhere and then it downloads. Now there's a big issue, isn't there, globally, because last week we talked about that the United Kingdom Security Services, or the government, has insisted that there is a backdoor into the iCloud, i.e. they can hack into people's iClouds to find anything suspicious, I suppose the investigation of terrorism, for example.
Yes.
Not everyone happy.
Definitely not, and the US definitely is not happy either. So basically, like last week, we did talk about the Investigatory Powers Act from 2016. A lot of people are calling that the Snoopers Charter, and I think it's quite an apt name, really. And basically, what they're asking for is that the UK has access to everyone's iCloud data. Currently, you can ask it to be encrypted, and that means that no matter which government asks for, you know, your personal data, they are unable to do so, as there is sort of, you can imagine a master key, and that's not a key that you want to be shared among different governments. However, the US has responded this week, and they are not happy. Senator Ron Wyden has written to the Director of National Intelligence of the UK, urging her to retract the UK's demand. And that's because the demand that the UK government has access to people's iCloud data is not just limited to people in the UK. I mean, if it was just a national issue, maybe there would be less backlash. But that would basically result in everyone's data worldwide that's hosted in iCloud being able to be accessed possibly by hackers and other foreign governments. And the thing is, if the UK asks for certain pieces of data, they urge Apple to actually not tell anyone. So we wouldn't know if any data has been accessed. And that is absolutely terrifying. And I have no idea why the UK has sort of decided to go down this route, which is could really affect UK-US relations when it's a relationship that's so fraught at the moment.
How do you think this is going to pan out?
I feel, this is a little bit of a conspiracy theory, I feel that the UK are actually demanding this as well, expecting it not to actually happen. They might just be asking Apple for a backdoor just so that they get a bit of publicity to see that, you know, we are doing something for national security, we are doing something to fight terrorism, when actually they know that, you know, Apple probably won't submit.
And what happens if Apple doesn't submit, the UK government presses on with this? I assume the US is going to fight this tooth and nail.
I think the US absolutely is going to fight it. But we might see a situation where it's a little bit like China, because the Chinese government does need to access the data of all of their citizens. What Apple does to get around that...
It needs to?
Well, needs to.
Yeah.
What Apple does to get around that is by hosting their own servers that are specific to the Chinese market. I don't know if the UK is big enough to do that.
I wouldn't have thought so.
I wouldn't think so. So I think that the UK might give in.
OK, we were talking about AI earlier, and also the real concern about when you start seeing things online, videos, for example, you don't actually know if they're true or not, whether they're real or whether they've actually been manipulated in some way or other. There is a video doing the rounds, isn't there, which has been generated by AI.
Yeah, and Scarlett Johansson and a number of other celebrities are especially angry about this.
Right,
so there's an AI video that's basically gone viral recently, and it's a response to Kanye West's, you know, anti-Semitic tweets, basically. And you can see that it uses a number of celebrities to basically give the finger to Kanye and, you know, anti-Semitism in general. However, the problem is that they did not, you know, get the permission from any of the celebrities to do this. And if you look very carefully, you can tell that it is completely deep-faked.
Can you?
And Yeah, so you could, there are certain telltale
there
signs.
I could.
The videos are quite short, they're not exactly speaking, and if you look really closely, the fingers, which are obviously blurred out over here, they do sort of melt into each other. So it is possible to determine if something is deep-faked or not. However,
at the moment,
yeah, it's getting more and more difficult every day. And my concern is that it's getting easier and easier. Adobe, for instance, released Firefly this week, and that basically gives, basically anyone access. I think it's around £20 a month to AI-generated video. So all we have to do is upload a picture or type in a prompt, and it can generate a few seconds of artificial intelligence video. And, we might live in a world where we won't really know what's true or fake, and that is deeply scary.
It is deeply scary. Now, going back to the United States, there was a ban on TikTok, wasn't there? Because it was about divesting from the parent company, getting rid of TikTok. This was ByteDance. There's something remarkable has happened as a result of this order. My understanding was that Trump said he was going to reverse it, but I think it's now on hold. Is that right?
So yeah, a number of things are happening at the moment with TikTok. Although Trump signed an executive order to sort of delay the ban of TikTok, both Apple and Google weren't confident that they wouldn't be sued for hosting the app. Right. However, what's happened recently is that Apple has both Apple and Google have got TikTok back on their app stores.
Oh, they have, because they removed it from their app stores.
So it was removed for a while, but now they've got the confidence from the US government to restore access to it. And that's basically meant that a lot of people who are side-loading the app, which is basically downloading the app from a dodgy source and installing it onto your phone, that's no longer required. I think over 300,000 people actually downloaded TikTok from a dodgy app, from a dodgy site to install on their phone. Lots of security issues with that.
Numbers.
And then there was also a situation where people were selling their old phones with TikTok pre-installed for thousands and thousands of dollars.
I saw that. So one iPhone 15 Pro Max had a buy it now price of £13,000.
Yeah, I can't imagine that any of these devices sold, but it sort of shows how important TikTok is to the community. But like at this current point in time, the deadline, like Trump's extension, is getting closer and closer.
So at the moment, you can reinstall TikTok in the United States and you can still use it.
Yes, however, the future of TikTok is still not clear.
Interesting.
Unfortunately.
And the other thing, there's another story this morning about the rise of TikTok in political campaigning and how important it is to capture the youth vote.
Definitely, and I think that very much is why Trump is so adamant that TikTok survives, because a lot of people argue that it's because of the youth vote that Trump got from his TikTok campaign that he managed to make it over the line and make it back into office.
Well, indeed. Dave, it's always good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Davis Fang there. And today's Tech Rundown.
Tech Rundown.
Lots of messages coming in. David, different AI models should be used for different reasons. ChatGPT is a probabilistic model, so to use it for research on news makes it an ineffective tool. I'm not quite sure what that means. AI, according to Mark, is only as accurate as the information it is accessing for you. As the internet is full of garbage, then the old adage about computers still stands. Garbage in equals garbage out. I still would rather do my own research. I would agree with you. We were also talking earlier about immigration. Good morning, David. It's a fact. Immigrants get treated better. I'm seeing more and more people being housed. Where I live, my daughter, 2 children have had to move in with me. There are no houses. Please, someone do something about the state of our nation. Keep all of those messages coming in. Good morning, David. Great show as usual. Thank you, Diane. Thank you very much indeed. The Falklands War made me feel as though I needed to do something for the country. I joined the army. Wow. I would do it all again if I was young enough. That is brilliant to hear. Good morning, David. This is Alan in Petersfield. Another great show. How on earth could we, the United Kingdom, defend the 4 corners of our homeland when we can't even stop rubber dinghies gently floating across the channel? We are a laughingstock. Let's go to a break now. After the break, your calls, your thoughts, your messages. This is Talk.
they seem to be obsessed, and I use the word deliberately, with human rights law, and that leads to the madness of offering to pay Mauritius £18 billion that we could far better spend on our own defence in order to rent back a group of islands that belong to us in the first place. This utter obsession with human rights warps many of the decisions that they take. So in that sense, I would probably agree with Vice President Vance.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Final part, weekend breakfast, loads of voice notes. Michael, good morning.
Morning, David. It's Michael from Lancashire. Who the hell is that woman that you've got on there? No wonder this country is in the trouble that it's in. Great show, David. Lovely to see you. Bye.
Thanks very much. That's a lovely grace. Jonathan, you're up next. Good morning.
How have we got into a situation where, not just in this country, but in several countries, we've got elected leaders representing their country, representing a country that are actively working against the interests of their nation. They're actively working against their own people and having more interest and more attachment to countries and issues and people outside of the nation they're supposed to be representing, more interested in them and that than in their own people and their own country. How have we got to this point? I mean, you just couldn't make it up.
No, you really couldn't. Ian is next. Good morning to you, Ian.
Hi, David. Back to defending or fighting for the country. I'd fight for my family, my friends, but I don't think I'd fight for the country, because the country isn't the country that I was born in. It's now deteriorated after 14 or 18 or 20 years of inept government started by Blair opening the floodgates, and we're now housing loads of people who want us ill. Why would I fight to defend those people? Now, if there was a civil uprising, yeah, I would fight for that, because I want our country back.
Wow. Ian, thank you. Very pertinent points indeed. Let's take a call now. Georgina is in London. Good morning.
Good morning, David, and it's fabulous to be on the talk show, probably the only one where the freedom of speech is still allowed.
Oh, 100%, 100%. Feel free to say whatever you want this morning.
Indeed I will. I would like to think that the majority of British citizens would fight for their country, and it also means fighting for the safety of their own families. But seeing as we have more immigrants, both legal and illegal, of fighting age in the UK than the number of soldiers we have in our forces. The most important question, I feel, is would the legal and illegal immigrants who reside in England's green and pleasant land be prepared to take up arms and protect our shores and our inhabitants?
What do you think?
Well, this needs some serious thought with things that are going on. We've only got to watch the television day in, day out, and its problems. I mean, you can't even speak about them, because if you try to hold your own nowadays and try to talk about things that are going on in the world, that's classed as hate speech.
Yeah.
So it is silencing the majority of people in this country. The government also wants to let another 2 million Palestinian immigrants into our country.
Do we know that?
Well, that's what they're saying. It was supposed to be the Ukrainians who were going to come into the country. But they're saying
And
now
they're saying
that
that's
they
been
are-
hijacked. Sorry, time is tight. Georgina, really brilliant points. Thank you very much indeed for those. Peter Cardwell, another lovely pink shirt. Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed. Great question this morning, by the way, about
You seem
whether...
surprised.
No, I'm not surprised. About they always are on this programme.
Yeah, very good.
You know, is Britain worth fighting for and why? We're asking, are we ready for war as a country? Similar question.
No.
But, well, exactly. That's certainly what Lord Dannett is saying. We're going to talk to the Shadow Defence Secretary, James Cartledge, in about 40 minutes' time. So very much looking forward to that interview. There's so much to talk about, of course, with
What
Ukraine.
percentage? Well, tell me, what percentage of GDP do you think we should spend?
I have no idea. I mean, like Trump says it should be 5%. The